question I have on is, what is the eventual goal of Buddhism, if there is one? Would you say that it's happiness of some kind, or would it be more like meaning, or what?
You know, meaning, when we think about it, is kind of, or at least the way I thought about it before I became a Buddhism, is almost like this needle that you dive into a haystack for. You dive in there and you're looking for this one gem, one thing, one concept that is going to set you free. And in Buddhism, there isn't anything like that. So meaning, the goal of Buddhism is ultimately happiness. But it's kind of happiness that's different from the way we perceive happiness to be.
One sure way to know that I'm having a mental breakdown, one 100% guaranteed way of discovering that, is seeing me get up early in the morning, like at 7 or 8 a.m., and just be ready to embrace life. This never happens to me under normal circumstances. This didn't even happen to me when I was experiencing hypomania. This never happened to me in my life until I became full-on manic. And this is how it started. I would get up in the morning and I was just ready for life. And where else would I go? Of course, the gym. Again, nothing I would fucking ever do in the morning. I wouldn't fucking skip over to this gym. So I got this gym membership at LA Fitness. And in the mood that I was growing into, this LA Fitness became some sort of like a social club to me, like some sort of like an elite club, like a country club or something. This is how I kind of behaved in there, and this is how I regarded it. This was like the beginning of my day at LA Fitness. So listening to rap music, that West Coast that we love, I would just go on my bike onto this LA Fitness, and then I would just hang out there for a while. I'd get in there, say hello, of course, to the girls behind the counter, something I never fucking do. I'd get in there, I'd flirt with them a little bit. Sometimes I'd chat up the girl next to me on the machine, another thing I would fucking never do. It seems like these girls knew me. Yeah, I mean, this was fucking insanity already. Okay, so I would fucking do some shit on the machines, then I would take a shower. I would never fucking take a shower at any fucking public gym if I could fucking avoid it. But this is, I take the shower. I thought the membership was overpriced, so naturally I'd fucking snatch a few towels. I'd steal a few towels, and then I'd continue on my very way. Now, there was a sauna there. I naturally popped in there, and again, this is fucking, even though there was a Russian tradition, I fucking hate seeing human naked bodies. I find human flesh to be repellent, and I avoid it at all costs, and I don't want to be in proximity to it, to naked humanity. I don't want it. But at that time, I just popped in there. Who do I see? There is some douchebag there, sitting in a lotus position. So I decide to chat him up. Did. Turns out he's a German. Now there's an easy topic for conversation. Fucking World War II and the Third Reich. I just mentioned that I'm Russian and that a big part of my family died in the war. The guy fucking scattered out of the sauna. He fucking left. My dude, I don't blame you for it personally. It's just maybe it's time for you to confront the history just in an abstract way, dude. Where the fuck did you go? You were just sitting here in a fucking lotus position, dude. Anyway, after the sauna, I would go on to laze around by the pool. I'd maybe take a lap in the pool, or maybe even I wouldn't. And I would just sit around there and read the New Yorker. Like any normal person, of course, I didn't read the New Yorker cover to cover. I just flipped through it to look smart. Sitting there by the pool was supposed to be my time to think over the rest of my incredibly productive day, the rest of this momentum, cultivating my energies for the rest of the day. But sometimes I just plop into there with the jacuzzis, with the grandmas, talk to them, talk to some dude in there who actually was pretty interesting, told me he had a job cleaning up bodies after deaths or after crime scenes. So that was an interesting benefit of the whole thing. Now, after that, I would leave the gym and continue with the insane rest of the day. Now, one of the projects I have initiated, well, the biggest project that was on my mind, it was Buddhapedia. And the idea behind Buddhapedia is that it was like a website, an introductory website to Buddhism. Like there's like so many people want to become Buddhists, presumably, and yet there isn't one website that really fucking puts the Dharma together. And it's like there would be like a page for beginners, and of course the person doing the introduction to Buddhism on all levels would be myself. So I needed to hire people. Now, the people I needed to hire, seemingly for positions that need not be there, as part of the Buddhapedia project. So for example, for some reason, just filming myself as I'm doing right now didn't occur to me. I needed some fucking human tripod to hire some people off of Craigslist who could give a shit about Buddhism, so they can ask me questions about Buddhism and I can reply like a teacher, like some sort of a sage. Now at this point, also, I started dressing like a complete fucking asshole. I started wearing these flamboyant outfits and spending enormous amounts of money on clothes. And I also dyed my hair black. And I got earrings, which are no longer there. And I was just this very bizarre person. I was wearing these different Buddhist amulets and different cheap fucking Buddhist blings and different little shits I found just around anywhere at stores. They would literally rattle when I would walk around, and I remember, you know, going on my bicycle and that shit would rattle, my fucking Buddhist bling. A lot of people actually start wearing a lot of jewelry when they're manic. That's kind of somewhat of a, I guess you could call it the Mr. T syndrome or whatever the fuck. So I hired these guys off of Craigslist to help me out. And these people were, many of them were much older than myself. They would be my age now, whereas like 30s, early 30s, late 20s, whereas I was like in my early 20s and I was like their boss. But they kind of regarded me, seemingly in retrospect, with some sardonic bemusement. So we would have these fucking meetings, these group meetings about Buddhapedia. We would meet at some cafe, and here I come in looking like a fucking clown. And I would literally like take out like a wad of cash, well, whatever, a few kind of like some crumpled bills, completely disorganized, and I'd be like, Bob, I think I owe you like fucking $20 or $40 or whatever, or you drove me here, I'll give you a 10. And we would talk about the brand of Buddhapedia and how I should make the videos, and I would start talking about fucking Buddhism. And to the extent that anybody should have known that I'm insane, these people should have fucking known. Because there was no way to perceive me at that point in any kind of a rational way. You know, so I was basically, this was the abuse of the mentally ill right there. These fucking Buddhapedia fucking business meetings. As things got rolling, I actually started to refer to myself as the new Ivan. The new Ivan broke through the wall of freedom, through the wall of realization. The new Ivan was no longer constrained. Everything that I hated about myself, my timidity, all of these things were gone. And in fact, the new Ivan was so new that I don't fucking relate to those few weeks of my life at all. After the old Ivan returned, I had no way to process what happened to me. Like, I just kind of don't relate to it at all. I can relate to my hypomania because it's kind of still is connected. It's not out there completely in the stratosphere. But with this kind of fucking new Ivan, I feel that there is a lot of separation. A lot of things changed for me for the new Ivan. For one thing, I have came to the realization that I'm the reincarnation of Agvan Dorjev. Now, I think that idea might have been with me before, but here it really became 100% true fact. And that narrative that I described at the very beginning of the video was the central one. The idea that I'm this reincarnated Lama who's going to become the president of Russia and then create an autonomous Tibetan Republic and bring democracy to Russia and all this kind of stuff. As crazy as that kind of a deluded notion is, I wish what I was experiencing was confined to that. That is to say, if you've ever read any memoirs or autobiographies of people with bipolar disorder or people who experience psychosis, a lot of what they believe is even like more goofy than this. By standards of psychotic narratives, like this isn't bad. It could be much worse, like I'm Jesus and I'm communicating with aliens, kind of a thing. You know, so this was nice. And I wish that it was all it was. But unfortunately, it's not to be. This was not about neat narratives. This is about spirituality and horniness, a burst of energy altogether. And as my brain was weaving together some sort of a story around this emotions, it had to look ridiculous. There was no way of avoiding it. It's kind of like suddenly it's the cart that goes in front of the horse, and the horse tries to stay up on its feet as the cart is dragging the horse off of a cliff. This was what was happening with my rational thought at the time. Have you ever heard of this quote by Ronald Reagan? One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Well, in the same way, this kind of an energy that forms around you when you are, in fact, manic, it's one person's clown is another person's fucking charismatic individual, I guess. A certain charisma starts to build up around you, a certain energy. And of course, it's in no way universal in appeal, but it can bring people to you. And I actually have a side theory that a lot of the cults were started by people with bipolar disorder. Because if you think about this expansive, ridiculous imagination, grandiosity, etc. Well, anyway, so there was a girl that I'll call Leah. She really was into me at the time, and we did hang out a lot. One time she brought me a marijuana cookie, and then we drove outside of the city, went to the farm, and I was just laughing at barn animals. I was just laughing at all the different barn animals. Took a picture with a Mexican gardener there. As always, the people who do the actual heavy lifting here in the States. And this one time, her and I were hanging out by waterfront Seattle. And I saw something that was unacceptable to me. I saw this hipster couple, this skinny hipster guy was sitting on the knees of his girlfriend. And as I saw this, you understand, as the future supreme commander of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, I found this display to be disgusting. And I fucking told her so. And in fact, at this period, my politics completely shifted from that of like a Western, whatever, American liberal to that of a Russian nationalist. I mean, a strange Buddhist one, but nonetheless, I guess my old fucking patriotic Russian chip that is implanted into all of us with birth has suddenly become unleashed by the mania. And I even thought to myself at the time that in the future, when I'm in the Kremlin, I will ban Russian adoptions to these decadent Western countries. And you see, I didn't even have to get into the Kremlin for that to happen, because some years later, Vladimir Putin actually signed a law just like that, targeting America.
Now, President Putin has signed off on a bill aimed at US citizens accused of abusing the human rights of Russians. It includes a ban on Americans adopting Russian children.
I discovered that Ice Cube was coming to town. I had to see Cube. I just had to. When I got there, there was a girl who needed to go through to the stage, and naturally I let her through, saying, "Go ahead, beautiful," because this is how I was communicating. This is how I was communicating in the time. She winked and said thanks. Okay, and then Ice Cube went over there, and I was fucking, bouncing around, fucking, to the beats, motherfucker, just kind of jumping around in there, fucking, And so naturally, like a concert like that is populated primarily by like white teenagers, and one of them said, "You danced to our spot." That's what he told me. "You danced to our spot." So I kind of fucking got in his face and I was like, "I'm gonna kill you, motherfucker." Okay, so he backed off, and then he told some other guy, and that guy was afraid to confront me. So I just fucking continued with the show. But there was another confrontation I had me pull out a knife on a guy. How about that? So my friend and I were at this bar in the Ballard neighborhood, and as I left it, this guy kind of came up behind me and started like fucking pulling on my coat, pulling on my leather coat, and laughing like an idiot. Now he himself was fucking coked up, I'm sure. There was fucking something wrong with this motherfucker. And so I told him, "Fucking get off of me, man, get off of me, alright?" And he's like, "What are you gonna do?" I was like, "Well, I have a knife." And he's like, "Oh, really?" He's like, pull it out on. And I fucking pulled it out. Now, I had a different knife at the time. This is the one I currently carry. So I pulled it out, and he looked in my face and said, Stab me, man. Well, he got me there. I couldn't go that far. Though in retrospect, I kind of wish I had, if I could get away with it. Because here's what happened next. A gentleman approached us and wanted to play the peacekeeper. Now, this gentleman happened to be an African American. And this guy, guess what he said? It's that word again. He called him a nigger. It's like, there is never a good place and time to call anybody a racial slur, but even on that hierarchy of unacceptability, this motherfucker like fucking shot it out of the park. It was just pure vile racism. This is the kind of a person I would call a dog. Okay, this is the person I would call a dog, a fucking racist dog. This is what I would call this guy. So anyway, he kind of fucking ran away. And myself and the guys kind of chased him for a little bit. But this motherfucker scattered. In fact, the local hipster told us. He said, there are police around here. There are police. He kind of gave us the warning. Thanks, man. Thank you for that. Because you know how the police in America treat African Americans and Russians with undiagnosed bipolar disorder. In fact, this could have been a huge disaster for me because I was not a citizen at the time, and every little fucking thing potentially on your record could prevent you from obtaining citizenship. So I came kind of close to total disaster. My friend and I were looking for this piece of shit in our car. We cruised the neighborhood a little bit. But this fucker, he wasn't even just white. I mean, he was fucking yuppie, not yuppie, fucking preppy white. He was like, he would like wouldn't look out of place in a country club. I hope somebody fucking kicked his ass by now, but probably he just runs fucking finances for some tech startup in Silicon Valley. That's if I had to bet. Now I'll be closing up this discussion of mania of this specific episode in a few moments, but I can't close it up without mentioning the ladies. Now, a fixation with the ladies, or specifically hypersexuality, is one of the hallmarks of bipolar disorder. Now, I think it's more unfortunate perhaps for females, maybe, okay, just maybe, than it is for males. And in any case, I wasn't especially lucky in that category during that manic period. I was just running around, too much time, needed to fucking hang out at the gym and all that. But I, of course, during this time, I did produce a business card, specifically that I would hand out to the ladies. And this is one of the most profane and disgusting things that have emerged out of the mania. It's so horrible. It's almost like some sort of a joke somebody created, this fucking business card that I would hand to women. Thankfully, I made it while I was manic, but I'm pretty sure it got delivered to me after I stopped being manic. But there is one card that remains with us today from that period, and I think there's also a design I have in my archives of this card that I've uncovered. So this is the card. For some reason it has these female lips with a skull on the front of this business card. I don't know how this is supposed to appeal to women, like a female kiss with this pirate fucking skull. I don't know what the idea there is. I don't know what the idea, how it connects with female attraction and desire for me. Their overwhelming desire naturally should fucking express itself in this fucking card. But the most profane and hideous things are on the back. I mean, I can't fucking believe it. It says here, Ivan. And then underneath it says, it has my email address. Check out this email. u.rre.mine@dr.com. You're mine at doctor.com. I actually got that email. I wouldn't hand out the ladies fucking a card without a proper email that actually worked. So somewhere I can uncover a password for that email. I mean, this is not a joke. If you imagine, like, no matter how low of an opinion you have on me, imagine how many degrees of separation there are between me and the person who composed it. And yet the torture for me doesn't end here. The torture of embarrassment. I mean, this is so horrible, it's now beyond embarrassment. But this is what it says here at the very bottom in very small text. This is what it says here. It's a quote from a rap lyric from Lil Wayne. And it goes like, la 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 la, la 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 la. Imagine if I did that with your pearl on my tongue. Ha. Yep. Imagine, ladies, if you were to get a special card like this from a complete stranger at a bar, which is exactly what I plan to do with it. Thankfully, Destiny has aborted these plans because the business cards arrived by the time I could recognize their total and complete insanity. The final thing I'm going to mention is spending. This is one of the few items that still remain with me from that period. These binoculars. I didn't just buy these, I bought a couple of others, like bird watching binoculars with a camera, a couple of other sets, a bunch of knives, but mostly clothes, mostly like sneakers and clothes, and I promise I never use these binoculars for any creepy reasons, okay? It's just something I found. The reason I kept them is not because I used them for anything creepy, no. It's just an item that I found. These are nice binoculars, presumably I could use for something. You could see they're fucking dusty and I haven't fucking used them for anything creepy, alright? No need for mental health stigma here, alright, man? Just gonna fucking chill down with that shit. Man, I'm fucking like becoming manic just talking about that shit. Mostly what I bought was clothes. And so I opened up a couple of credit cards. The first credit card I opened up in my manic period, especially almost to like torture me and kick myself in the balls, because because my credit rating was very good at the time. I got myself like a credit limit of $7,000 at the start of my manic period, and then I fucking spent the whole thing. And I got other credit cards, I opened others, and by the end of it, in these like 2 to 3 weeks, I've accumulated a debt, went from zero to like $15,000. I remember going through the stores and just grabbing shit, just grabbing clothes and just piling them up and filling the cart. And then I would come to the register and my card would get declined. You'd think that this was an embarrassment. No, I just needed to get a different card from home. Now remember, I didn't have a car, so I would walk up the steep hill for like 20 minutes, get like a credit card that worked, came back down, took the clothes, and these were like huge fucking bags. And like an old woman going to the bazaar in Uzbekistan, I would haul these bags back to my apartment. And guess what was in these bags that I discovered after I stopped being manic? As I was going through these bags later on, some of these clothes really didn't fit me. You see, my basic size is XL. Now I normally wear double XL to kind of, you know, hide those fucking curves of mediocrity. Anyway, to not look fat, I wear double XL, but guess what the sizes there were? No, they weren't large, they weren't medium, they weren't even small. I mean, a lot of them were, but some of them were fucking kids' clothes. Why did I buy kids' clothes? Now, I had no manic desires to like start a huge family or whatever. No, I bought kids' clothes because I was so impulsive. I was just grabbing at shit. Like, I would literally saw like some sort of a design and I just fucking grab it. And I ended up with fucking bags of different clothes, including fucking kids' clothes and clothes that I couldn't wear. So that's kind of the level of unhinged spending that we're talking about here. My friends, so what are the conclusions here? Now, if you ever hear another one of these kind of sour pusses say, antidepressants don't work, baby, do they? They fucking work, you see, they fucking work. Would I have this manic episode without an antidepressant triggering it? I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't. I think that my normal rhythms of mania were much milder than this. Could I at some point develop the idea that I am the reincarnation of Agvan Dorjev? I'm pretty sure I could, but all the other shit, and especially like something like this manic spending, I've never experienced that before or since. I'm always bad with money, but I'm bad with money as in that I don't save for emergencies. I eat out a lot, I kind of waste money here and there, but I never like deficit spend. I never fucking would open the credit card and just start buying random shit. Not even during my hypomanic periods that tended to kind of withdraw me from the world and connect me with the world in my head, but kind of withdraw me from the world and not so much send me to the mall to shop. It's a strange mania for me to behold. It's the most intense one, but as I've kind of said before, it turned me into a different person. In fact, I wish I had a kind of a higher class, fancier comparison to it, but the only thing that comes to mind is that movie Mask with Jim Carrey, which actually is not a bad movie at all considering the genre, etc.
So, Dr. Newman, you're saying that everybody wears a mask?
That's correct, Wendy. We all wear masks, metaphorically speaking. We suppress the id, our darkest desires, and adopt a more socially acceptable image.
Well, the book is, of course, The Masks We Wear by Dr. Arthur Newman. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's party time! P-A-R-T. Why? Because I gotta!
Now in my case, I'm not sure that these are like really primal forces within me, all of them, because in many ways I've just became like an obnoxious clown. So I don't really relate to this mania at all. I don't relate to this new Ivan. I'm very much the old Ivan nowadays. It's not the same as these hypomanias that I experienced that were more actually connected with my experience with myself as a person. This was like something different entirely. After these festivities, I have collapsed in the bleakest and darkest depression I have experienced to date. Now, in this video, actually my precise use of technical kind of medical words isn't correct, because I describe these kind of powerful depressions where I was completely unable to work, on which I had two. I describe these as clinical depressions, but according to technical definitions, pretty much all of my depressions would be considered clinical as I understand them. That is to say, they lasted for more than 2 weeks and they interfered with my life, etc. But I personally, just for the sake of this video, I just described these two depressions as clinical depressions because I was unable to function. For one thing, I had no way to process what just happened to me. I snapped out of these delusions, but I had no way to process them. That is to say, like, how do you process the idea that just like a week ago, you believed yourself to be Agvan Dorjev, and now you don't? Well, I was falling into depression and I processed it in no way whatsoever. I completely kind of ignored it. And in fact, what I tried to do was to ignore everything, my failing financial situation, just everything. And not only was I trying to ignore it, I just basically wasn't constitutionally able to deal with anything at the time. The only successful thing I was able to pull off at the time was defrauding, or I should say, gaining my unemployment benefits. You see, I've became the unemployment master from working there, and though even I quit my job, I was able to get these benefits, even though you normally shouldn't. I think I said I had a medical reason for quitting my job. I don't know how I classified that medical reason at the time, but I fucking got these benefits. And that was the only fucking... This is what I was living in. And in fact, I didn't have that much to live on. Essentially, I'm not going to describe this depression at any great depth for the simple reason that I will describe clinical depression in its full glory during my second one, which was even more powerful than this one. I mean, this one lasted for around 8 to 10 months. I no longer remember the exact dates just because I was kind of out of it, understandably. And the second one lasted for over a year. But to say a few words about this one, it was basically defined by me not being able to get out of my house. What I did essentially is buy drugs, buy sleeping pills, and take as many of them as I could to sleep for as long as I possibly could. At the same time, I had a depression philosophy emerge, and it would rejoin me during my second severe depression. So the philosophy was a sense that there were people out there who were capable of developing cohesion with people around them in their life. That is to say, like your stereotypical family with their golden retriever, being very isolated from the suffering of the world and from the random nature of the universe. They have created this little bubble, and that little bubble of cohesion spells happiness for them. Now, in my kind of self-congratulatory, depressive philosophy, I wasn't able to achieve this. So on the one hand, I was incompetent in living in the adult world. On the other hand, everybody was kind of deluded. They didn't see what I saw. So you see that the nature of my depression was not specifically targeted at self-guilt and self-hatred. There were certainly elements of that. I didn't believe I could function in the world, but there were elements of criticizing and being disgusted with the world. And in that vein, I would listen to a lot of books, audiobooks, about genocides, about World War II. And on the one hand, this kind of horrified me, but it also reinforced this kind of a sense of a random, cruel universe. So paradoxically, I was both reinforcing my depression, but also creating some sort of a relief. But the real goal was to fall asleep. Like the real goal was dwell in this state between not sleeping and sleeping, and kind of being more relaxed in that state and then falling asleep. Being asleep is the only aspect of it that I enjoy. I would leave my house only like once a day, just for like 20 minutes to run to this place called Herpes that locals sometimes jokingly refer to as herpes. But it's basically like a burger joint, and this franchise was run by a very nice Korean family, and these were the only people I've interacted. I would order my burger, my huge burger, and like a milkshake. We would smile at each other, and then I would retreat back to my place, take fucking sleeping pills, and pretend that nothing was going on around me. At this time, I wasn't just contemplating death and destruction of other people, I was also contemplating my own. And I was looking around on the internet for gun stores in Seattle. The ironic thing about depression is it seeps your ability to act in the world. It destroys your incentive, and that also includes the incentive it takes to kill yourself. People who commit suicide connected with depression, they commit suicide often going out of depression, but then all of a sudden they have a fall of mood, but they have this new life energy, if that makes sense. Like they have renewed energy, but suddenly their mood falls and they think, oh shit, I'm going back to that hole. I'm not going to allow that to happen. And then they kill themselves. However, when you're at the depth of depression, it's kind of a difficult thing to execute. Like it was difficult for me to just buy a gun and go through all the permits and become a part of gun culture, etc. And the other ironic thing is because I doubted myself, I also doubted my ability to commit suicide. Like you focus on the negative, and in the same way I've just focused on people for whom it didn't work out. Like, you know, the people who like blew part of their face off and yet remained alive. I thought, you piece of shit, this is what's gonna happen to you. Or I'll try to hang myself and I'll fall and end up with brain damage. Like these were the thoughts that happened to me. However, like one of the things when people talk about mental stigma, what comes to mind, to me at least, is this kind of expression about people who have committed suicide. They took the easy way out. Motherfucker, like, try to think about committing suicide. Now, I'm sure there are fewer barriers to killing yourself for an average person than it is for killing another person. But it's just not, these barriers are vast, even if you profoundly want to die. That is to say, if a button was available to me that I could just press and die, I don't think I'd be making this video right now. Even if a different kind of button was available to me, readily available, perhaps the same thing would have happened. But as far as acquiring anything in that state of depression, no, I wasn't able to do it. Now, after a few months of this, I was essentially kind of facing homelessness. I wasn't able to work, the unemployment check wasn't cutting it, and I really had to finally take action. I dreaded taking action. I hardly left the house except to go to fucking Herpes. One time a friend invited me to their birthday party, and I just, to this day, I remember riding on the bus. I was just so consumed with anxiety and paralysis and going to this party, I just sat there like a zombie. So this was kind of the state that I was in, yet I had to move, I had to leave. And I'm really grateful to the few friends that I had at the time. Unfortunately, I lost contact with them at this point, but I'm really really grateful to them for helping me out, for helping me to move my stuff to the storage. To me at that point, like doing all that shit was like a superhuman feat. I couldn't believe that I have accomplished this, you know, putting my shit in storage and buying a ticket out of there. Now, when I came back here to Cincinnati, it was one of the most horrible things to experience. My adult life has completely failed. Not only that, but I had to now confess to my mother about my fucking $15,000 in credit card debts. And in fact, the creditors started suddenly calling the lines at this house. Somehow they fucking found out I probably, like an idiot, changed some phone number. And they found out, motherfucker, there is a thing called Google Voice. Google Voice allows you to have a phone number connected with Google, with your Google account. So guess where the creditors are calling now, and have been calling for years. I don't know if the service is available at all anymore, but that's its only useful application that I can think of. I spent my defeated time back home in this room, being completely locked up and as isolated as I could be. My mother forced me to take walks every day or every other day, and that was my only outing. I got really fat. I actually ballooned to like 275 pounds, which when you're 6'4", you certainly look fat, but you don't look obese. So that's one of the privileges of being tall. But I got really fat, and here's my fucking picture from that time when I got my naturalization papers and finally became a real pseudo-American that I am today. This was kind of really expresses my mood at the time very, very well. But eventually something happened. There was magic in the air. There was magic in the air, and I started pacing around a little bit. And not only did I start pacing around, I started listening to rap. I started listening to Lil Wayne. And I thought to myself at the time, you know, when the depression is over, when you start listening to rap, well, we know what rap means. But not only was I listening to rap as I started to emerge out of the depression, I was doing something else. I was watching CNBC and Bloomberg TV. Dude, we're going into finance. Forget fucking religion. Forget becoming president of Russia. Now we're gonna be rich. We're gonna be rich.
I am not a destroyer of companies. I am a liberator of them. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit.
And this is the point. If I had to choose one point to show how bipolar totally defines your life, it would be this one. Because now I was just emerging out of a depression that basically destroyed 10 months of my life at least, and a manic episode that destroyed my finances and my adult life. And yet I wasn't emerging into a rational view of the world. I was emerging into another mania. A hypomania this time. I was not gonna like fucking buy kids clothes because I was so impulsive. I was emerging in my good old hypomania. And I believe this started to happen also around the beginning of the year, right fucking on schedule. And I dismissed this whole episode as just a reaction to an antidepressant. And that's the weird fucking thing about it. Because I had one piece of the puzzle. I knew exactly what happened to me. That is to say, I had the word mania. I knew that it was mania. In fact, I wrote it in an essay about this part of my life. I said I was manic, and sometimes certain people react to antidepressants with a mania. Now, these certain people are called bipolar, but for some reason this escaped me. Probably because I just wanted to avoid anything connected with psychiatry and didn't want another diagnosis. But unfortunately, I would pay for this because now my life was getting off track again, just in a different way, in a more milder way that I was used to, in a more hypomanic way. My friend, I got myself a reading list at the time, so this is one of the books I read, The Alchemy of Finance by none other than fucking George the Lizard Globalist Soros.
Safe place, mommy! I mean, what freaks! Aren't you ashamed of yourselves? What the fuck's your problem? Excuse me, I can't do it anymore. I hate George Soros, just turn it off.
But this is not the only book I've read. I've reread The Intelligent Investor by Ben Graham, who was the guru of Warren Buffett. I read like a fucking huge biography of Warren Buffett. I read a bunch of other fucking financial books at the time. And I created my virtual portfolio on Google. You know, and my virtual portfolio actually did pretty well at the time. I had my first interest in finance when I was actually in college. And my mother gave me $500 to invest. I found the stock, and amusingly enough, the stock tripled in price after I bought it. So naturally, it confirmed my financial genius at the time. Definitely confirmed it wasn't just a piece of luck that happened to me. And now I needed to reignite this dormant passion. I'm gonna work for a bank. I found a job in Columbus, and I was going to work for a bank. Now, I was going to work for a bank as a customer service representative, which has nothing fucking to do. It's kind of like saying I'm going to work as a zoologist by fucking shuffling the shit of elephants at the zoo. That's not exactly how it works, but that's how it worked at my mind at the time. And so I was off to fucking go to Columbus. Columbus, remember, was associated with the happiest time in my life. And I wanted to reignite it. I didn't want to be a failure as an adult, and in order not to be a failure, I could now ride a new hypomanic high of going to Columbus. Now, my mother, who had a more rational approach to things, she kind of saw that I was depressed and a zombie for fucking 10 months or more, or however long it was. And she was more reluctant to let me go. But the edgelord that I was like, fuck it, I gotta go. I have to go. And now with a car granted to me from my stepfather, I inherited his 1999 Acura, which is a fucking awesome car. I hit a fucking deer here. It wasn't my fault, it was the deer. I'm sorry about it, but it ruined that car, but it was a fucking awesome car. A fucking awesome car. And now I was heading to Columbus, heading to begin my new life. I won't dwell too much on my life in Columbus, on my second coming to the capital of the state of Ohio, because nothing too amazing happened there. Now, as could be predicted, I did fall back into my depressive norm. But this depression was not as severe as the one in Seattle. That one was not that severe in Columbus, and I think the reason for that had to do with the schedule I enjoyed with my employer. And the schedule I had was working 4 days a week, 10 hours a day, but the schedule was an evening one, so it started at noon and ended wherever it ended, I think at 11 considering the lunch. Because of that schedule that nicely jived with my predisposition to go to bed late at night, I think it worked out more nicely for me as far as not being that depressed. There were a lot of cool people at my work, and there was a real great like orientation dance, you know, one of those team building things that these large corporations do, in which I didn't participate, but people really danced very well.
Man, this thing never ends. This is gonna go on until 5:30.
They really danced very well in that, and there was a cool group of people there. Now, the one thing I did do at work is really focus on my breaks and lunch. And what I would do during those times is, this was a large complex. I mean, this is a huge bank I was working for. And they had an artificial pond there with some trees where workers could walk around. Now, there were no fucking workers there aside from myself. There were myself and fucking, there were turtles there. There were cranes there. I could give tours around this pond, because what I would do is pace around it for as long as I could. Immediately when my break came on, I would just fucking run out of there and into that pond, and I would circle it for as long as I can. Part of my problem are racing thoughts that could be of depressive or manic nature, and sometimes they alternate. This sounds like complete bullshit, but unfortunately, the older I get, the more I see them interfere with my life. It's goofy to talk about. It doesn't sound kind of serious because you're not exactly dying. It's not like you can't do these tasks you need to do. You just can't do them efficiently or for long periods of time. And pacing around is what I did. What I do now is I work as a fucking driver. I work as a driver because when I drive, I can process that shit. I can talk with myself. I can process my ideas. But the reflexive nature of driving really gives me the freedom to waste my life as I'm driving. And this is where I find myself today. Aside from pacing around this pond at a corporate complex, I also did other things. I volunteered with the Democrats. I saw President Obama speak at the time. I went on fucking that shitty website OkCupid and tried to connect with some ladies. I went on a few dates, but everything, as usual, just kind of fell back into sweet old melancholy. I just slid back into my puddle, and this is where I dwelled. Nevertheless, I did start writing a blog, and this was my first creative project in my life that attracted some attention from a very small number of people. But naturally, I mostly wrote about depression. And this is where I have met my first real fan, a person I called Superfan Dave. He was a programmer in California, and he will re-enter the narrative shortly here. This was also a historical period for the following reason. I found this thing. I found vaping, and I have been fucking vaping like a lunatic ever since. Now the thing about it is that before that I really wanted to take up smoking. Like, people ask people, have you smoked before? You know, since I fucking vape all the time. No, I never smoked before. And the reason I never smoked before is because I knew I had a correct premonition that if I were to take up smoking, I would become a chain smoker immediately. I guess I was waiting for the heavens to bless me with this thing that looks like a car battery that I could stick into my mouth and inhale different weird chemicals that aren't smoke, that are vapor. The thing about people with bipolar disorder, something I probably should have mentioned earlier, is that they have a life expectancy that's 20 to 10 years lower than that of a person who's not afflicted with bipolar disorder. Now, one of the reasons for that could be suicide. 10 to 15% of people with bipolar disorder commit suicide. That is to say, not people who attempt suicide, which is like a quarter of them, but people who actually go through with it and leap on over to the other side. So that's 10 to 15% of people with bipolar disorder. If you were in a room with 1,000 people and they were bipolar and they were statistically average, 100 of them would be eventually gone. Well, anyway, that can make a dent in your aggregate life expectancy. But another thing that leaves a dent is chaotic lifestyle that can come with bipolar disorder and self-medication. Different nicotine, tobacco-related deaths are way higher among people with bipolar disorder. Smoking rates are way higher. There is some sort of a magic of nicotine, a magic of that cancer stick that really soothes the brain, even a little bit. I no longer know what it does to the brain because this is the first thing I reach for in the morning. Even though I'm quite poor, I spend like probably over $150 on it a month because I just fucking do it constantly. Every little piece of my life can be connected to this thing if I wanted to. I want to be free. I don't want to be connected with bipolar disorder with everything. I just picked up vaping off of my free will. I'm not addicted to nicotine. I'm not addicted to it at all. In the year 2013, a lot of hedge funds in New York, Connecticut, and across the country started to receive very mysterious and interesting letters. Letters that many of them have never seen before, the likes of. This letter that they received began with the following words. After ending his employment at the highest levels of the Soviet government, my client decided to take a dive into the thriving and chaotic world of Russian entrepreneurship that emerged in the smoldering gray ruins of the socialist empire. This venture resulted in my client becoming one of the wealthiest people in the world. If you ever thumbed through various Forbes lists, you have likely glanced at his name, left your fingerprints on his glossy image. If you visit his office, you will see a nicely framed image of my client standing next to an enigmatically smiling Vladimir Putin. The photograph is displayed prominently in the same way religious objects are used to scare away evil spirits. But the depravity of human condition that he has witnessed has left the man I represent with a deep and a profound appreciation of privacy. So these were the first 3 paragraphs of this letter. Guess who the author was? Yeah, it was me. I was representing my client. What I was trying to do instead was trying to score a job with a hedge fund. Hedge funds are poorly regulated, gigantic kind of institutions that manage money for very wealthy people. As a result of it, they kind of have the sexiest place in finance. This is where a lot of kind of MBAs want to work. This is the sexiest essence of finance, and of course the most lucrative. And that's where I needed to be. This is where I needed to be, and this baby, this letter I was sending out was my way into it. It was my way into the game. I actually didn't send out emails, I sent out physical letters. I always have this kind of a chip on my shoulder about being underpaid and being like a commodity when you work for a corporation or anywhere. You know how they have a department called Human Resources? Well, you are of course a resource. And I struck back against my bank where I felt, I didn't feel shit, I just felt used, and I was fine actually with it. But anyway, what I did is this, I just used their printers to print out fucking scores of these letters. And I mean, I sent out probably like 200 of these. There is a website you can find, if it still exists, called the Hedge Fund Monkey. The Hedge Fund Monkey. It had the list of all of these hedge funds, and I would mail out this letter. This was a 4-page letter. On the first page was what I just described, this mysterious introduction to my mysterious kind of oligarch client who wants to invest. And then it turns out that this client, in the same kind of a tone, has a philosophy for investing that he wants to outline for you to conform to as a person managing his money. Okay, so these people, some of them presumably read this letter. They just went down this philosophy, which was of course there to show off my knowledge and understanding of the markets. And then on the final page I did reveal myself. I did say I'm just this fucking nobody who works as a customer service, whatever fucking representative. And I concluded with this. This letter is a ridiculous idea, which I hope will work, but it was written without a sense of entitlement. Right, it's nice for me to point out that a stupid fucking letter was written without a sense of entitlement. Well, anyway, and let me continue. Maybe you had a time in your life when even the most preposterous initiative is worth a try, because it brings about a small possibility of change. And you see, what I'm talking about here is not really change, it's the crazy momentum. Of course, there's nothing that crushes a sense of momentum in life that I was addicted to. This kind of a sense of manic momentum, like working as a customer service serf. Because in that position, it's kind of one of these jobs that is very monotonous, but you can't just tune out from it. That is to say, you have to be constantly intellectually, cognitively engaged with it, because you're answering relatively complicated questions for people over the phone, over and over and over again. You can't tune out, and this is what I hated. And now this was my desperate plea, a strange desire to escape from this and reignite my dreams. Now here's the thing, my friend, it worked. Well, spoiler alert, I'm not actually working at a hedge fund right now, and I never did. But I did get replies, and I did get a job interview at a hedge fund. So let me not overplay it. When I say I did get replies, I got 2 replies. So I don't remember exactly the assets of the hedge funds that responded to me. But one of them, I think it was like around 5 billion they were managing, and I got an email from the second in command at that hedge fund saying that I'm a good writer. And he just praised my writing skills. And I said thank you, and that was it. This was my one touch with greatness. But the other one was really managing a massive amount of money. I think over $10 billion. And this was actually with the head of that hedge fund. I'm just not gonna reveal them for privacy reasons or whatever. I don't fucking know. I mean, I guess I could, but fuck it. And I was in consistent communication after a certain point with his personal assistant. He's a busy man, and he had some sort of an injury. So my interview with him was being pushed back and back. Now what happened during this time frame is I got canned from my job. I got canned from my job for the same reason. I was feeling exhausted. I needed a day to rest. So I was calling off. And then I needed to pace around the park there with with the crane that was in this pond, with the turtles. I needed to pace around and think my pointless thoughts and listen to Snoop Dogg. So because of these non-compliance, I was canned. Now it was very pleasant to see my supervisor crying for some reason. I mean, I think she saw me for the man-child that I was. She just saw this vulnerable doofus, incapable of living life, who like ran away to fucking pace around at every fucking opportunity at the office. And as she was parting with me, she was crying. However, I knew I was gonna work at a hedge fund. That's what I knew. So I thought, you know, well, this is the sort of a kind of a reality disconnect. I thought, you know, I'm leaving this place and I'm going to ascend right to the top of the financial ladder. And isn't this ironic? Isn't this ironic that I'm sitting here and she gave me my nameplate that was at my cubicle and all of it? When I'm on the ascent, there was in the back of my mind, you know, but it was nice to see somebody cry when they fire you. And I'm always cool with being fired. I'm always cool with being fired. Now, my prospective conversation with this guy was being pushed further and further back, and I was just anxiously waiting. It's like when I saw that email from his personal assistant, felt something. I really felt electricity at the time. But in the meantime, I had no job and I had no savings, and I had to do something. My car was broken at the time, and so I started working at this grocery store, a big kind of yuppie grocery store, kind of like a Whole Foods imitator, but larger, that was across the street from me. And I was fucking stocking shelves there at the middle of the night. Now, before I started driving, this college-educated individual, this was my favorite job. But unfortunately, unlike driving, I wasn't great at it. Specifically, it was about aligning cat food. Now, you know, cat food comes in these tiny little cans, these kind of that shit that cats like to eat. I'm not talking about the dry kind of bags of, but those little cans of cat food, okay? And I had to arrange them perfectly so the little kitty face would face the aisle and that they would be as close as they can be to the aisle. So it's like these fucking animals, these fucking cat owners would just fucking, you know, disassemble the whole shit. And there are like fucking tons of these different types of this fucking cat food. Motherfucker, it's like, fuck. It's like there are famines going on and there are like 100 types of cat foods that I never fucking thought about until now. And I was fucking rearranging them. But you see, with all my thoughts and all my ideas and all my schemings to work at a hedge fund, I just wasn't doing it fast enough. And so the supervisor told me, Ivan, this aisle looks so good. It's so presentable and so nice, but this, you have to speed it up. And he would just kind of tell me to like speed it up, like he would come see me at the cat aisle, you know, to just fucking do it faster, man. This is not a place for fucking daydreaming. This is a place to fucking arrange pet foods. Okay, well, I got fired from there. But as I got fired, I told him, man, I have no problem being fired. And in fact, I was just fired like a month ago or whatever. But like, did you have to like treat me like a bitch? And actually, I'm a big kind of a very timid person in real life, so this was a big deal. His whole kind of speeded up and kind of rude behavior really kind of hurt me for me to say it. I could say it way better now, and I could have said it better then, but that's just what I said. That's not like my best cursing exactly, or my best use of an expletive. Like, why did you treat me like a bitch? And he kind of was a little bit surprised by it. He was like a nice guy, a nice, good-looking young guy who really loved working at this grocery store. Like, that's, you know, he was just, you should have seen that motherfucker, like, fucking stocking the fucking toilet paper, fucking stocking the towels, fucking running around with a big cart, like, fucking opening it with a knife, fucking stocking that shit. I mean, he literally was dancing around there, I'm not kidding. He was just fucking dancing, and I was like the antithesis of it, like a fucking cat food zombie. I had to be canned. I had to be canned. But anyway, I was just kind of, I didn't like how rude he was. And in fact, if you ever work like working class jobs, they do kind of treat you without regard for your feelings. Well, anyway, he just said something like, oh, well, I hope you do better at your next job and, you know, you wouldn't have to have these issues or whatever. Well, anyway, I was fucking cat food fucking got me fired. I had bigger things in the horizon, and I was talking with the boss, talking with the hedge fund boss in Manhattan, where I maybe would have been heading soon. So this was my life. And finally I got to talk to this guy. Guess where it all went? Fucking swirled into the fucking toilet. It all went to nowhere, of course. In fact, we had some sort of a weird discussion for like 20 minutes about whether the markets are defined more by objective judgments or by psychological waves of sentiment, whether they were efficient market theory or not. This is what we talked about for 20 minutes, but I guess he wasn't convinced. Of course, I myself don't know shit about the technicalities of the market. So my only kind of selling point was I was like this weird fuck who didn't need to be paid much. Kind of like this weird, I don't know, like an autistic cousin who comes down and gives business advice or something. You know, like he comes down out of nowhere, like fucking Star Wars figurines start flying down the stairs and he just kind of tumbles out, fucking falls down the stairs, and once in a while he says insightful things, and he doesn't need to be paid much. I didn't need to be paid much. $40,000 a year was fine for me. It would do $40,000. I mean, maybe if I could advance later, but I was open. I was open to anything. Well, anyway, of course it didn't fucking go anywhere. He said thank you and good luck. And and that was the end of that. So my friends, would you say that pretending to be a representative of a secret oligarch and then revealing yourself to be just a regular corporate peasant in order to get a job at a hedge fund, would you say that that's a creative idea? Would this idea appear to me, would it grace my life if I wasn't bipolar? Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. Okay, but let's say that it wouldn't. Okay, let's say that it wouldn't, because it nicely goes into the topic I want to discuss, which is bipolar disorder and creativity. Bipolar disorder and creativity are consistently linked in scientific literature. Of course, there are naysayers, but I'll just present some data that I found to be, I guess, the most convincing, or at least whatever, the most interesting, let's say. So there was a very large study, a population study, I believe it was in Sweden, and they weren't studying specifically for bipolar disorder. They just had looking at a very large number of individuals, I think maybe up to 1 million. And out of the people in there who turned out to be bipolar, who were later diagnosed with it, a very large number of them went into creative fields, disproportionate to when compared to the regular people, okay? There are a lot of anecdotal evidence about different artists, etc., having mood disorders or mood issues. In many cases, people with artistic inclinations, if they themselves don't have a mental illness, there is a higher prevalence of mental illness in their family. And then there was a study that looked at associations. That is to say, if you take two words, disconnected words, how many associations can people come up with, or like metaphors or stories around these words, normal people versus bipolar people? The two words would be something like frog and umbrella. And then ready, set, go. Like, how many things can you connect it with? How can you connect these two words, unrelated words? People with bipolar disorder on average exceeded the expectations. Now here's a few things to say about creativity and bipolar disorder. I personally believe that bipolar disorder helps with my creativity, but I will discuss the nature and the quality of this creativity in a couple of moments. But like everything else, like any other kind of aspect of bipolar disorder, aside from the fundamentals of mood fluctuations, I mean, this is by no means universal. I think about like creativity and bipolar disorder, sort of like math and science abilities in people with autism. Now, a disproportionate number of them have it. They can do amazing things in their head with these disciplines, with these fucking fields of knowledge and calculation, okay? But many autistic people don't. Probably most of them don't. And it's the same way with bipolar disorder. I mean, there are people who have that connection and there are people who aren't that creative at all. So it's not in any way a universal thing. But here's what I really want to say. So to continue with comparisons with the people with autism, you know, there are people with autism who are very good at math. They're like human calculators. But their ability to calculate doesn't make them great mathematicians. There are other aspects that should be present. A person who can solve some sort of a math problem faster than the other doesn't necessarily mean that that person will then become a better mathematician. And when it comes to the bipolar, there's also a risk. And the risk is just kind of a random association generator. Let's take that example of a frog and an umbrella. What associations or like ideas or storylines come to you when you hear a frog and an umbrella? Well, like as for myself, I could say a frog crucified by umbrellas. I could say frogs having a civil war, frogs with red umbrellas versus frogs with black umbrellas. I can say a flotilla of frogs sailing on their umbrellas. I could say a mother frog dumping her eggs into an umbrella and then cultivating them there, like an upside down umbrella, like frogs parachuting into battle in an umbrella. Question is, do these, and let's say I came up with more than you did, okay? Maybe you have fucking frog, if you have great frog ideas, please post them in the comments to this video. We'll compare our notes. Maybe you are better than me at this. But let's say I had more. Does that really mean that this output translates into quality? And I don't really think that it does. All of these mutants should not live. Some of them should be aborted. And bipolar disorder isn't great at censorship, it's self-censorship and abortion. It's almost like you have a large rock and you want to carve a statue. Well, if you're manic, if you're bipolar, if you have this flood of idea, you're just gonna start carving different things at different ends of the rock. And what's gonna end up is gonna be profoundly incoherent. I think that there's a risk of that with bipolar disorder. And I also think that even if you have a great idea, like let's say I've come up with a great movie in my head, the whole life, the whole bipolar life cycle isn't really conducive to bringing it into existence. For one thing, you get a high out of this idea before anything happens. You almost don't need to bring it into life. If you're truly like powerfully manic, you're feeling it before anything actually happens. And then even if you start writing anything down, you then fall into a depression and then start over again. And who knows if your next idea is going to be a continuation of your last one, or if it's going to be a stupid garbage idea that's going to replace the good idea that you had. Bipolar disorder leads to chaotic lives, and it doesn't really necessarily lead to productive creative lives. All I want to say is this: in the same way as with autism, a lot of like successful scientists, they can have some autistic traits. It's almost like they won a genetic lottery or something, where they have some unusual traits of calculation and abstract reasoning that are artistic. They might be somewhat socially awkward and eccentric in some ways, but basically they function normally. They're not actually on the spectrum in the full sense of the word. And I think a lot of creative kind of individuals who have really excelled, they're not fully bipolar, they're borderline. They're borderline bipolar. That is to say, they have mood fluctuations and they have these highs, mood highs that are somewhat manic in nature, where they have that inspiration and they have that flow of ideas. But it's not so intense as to go beyond censorship, go beyond craft, you know, and just kind of into this pure, insane spiritual flow. They're not that far into it. They might have low moods, but they don't have a full-on, necessarily clinical depression that disables them. And so I think a lot of times, a lot of creative people, if you read their biographies, they're moody. But being moody doesn't make you automatically bipolar. You could be much closer to bipolar than an average person if you're moody in that sense, but that doesn't mean that you actually are.
Margaret Mitchell began writing Gone with the Wind in 1926, and she finished it 10 years later. The writing of a great book, or the making of a fine wine, takes time. Paul Masson's Emerald Dry, a delightful white wine. Paul Masson wines taste so good because they're made with such care. What was true nearly a century ago is still true today. Paul Masson will sell no wine before it's time.
So now I failed once again. I failed the yuppie cats at being unable to stock their food at the needed rate, at the needed speed at the supermarket. And I failed to acquire the job at the hedge fund and help guide the billions of the ultra wealthy into the best course and the best return for them. I failed at that. And so now all the arrows were pointing me in the old familiar place where I am right now, and that's my mother's house. I had to go back to my mother's house because I have depleted my savings. I had to return back to that familiar place. 2014, what a year, what a year. It was the last year of my life in a sense. The last year where I truly felt alive was the year 2014. I went back to Cincinnati and I looked forward. I looked forward to a year that would give me my second most powerful mania after the one I experienced in Seattle. I looked forward to a year where the Seattle girl would visit me finally, and where all my delusions and dreams and the beauty of the whole kind of insanity within me would culminate in anticipation of her, where all the metaphysical and magical forces would descend from the ground, from the heavens, from the forest, and where Ivan, the mystical magician of nothing, the magician of his own hollowness, would wave his fucking wand around, fruitlessly of course, but perhaps beautifully, at least if you were in my head. It was the return, the glorious return of Ogvan Dorjev, the lovesick monk that I am. The lovesick Mongolian monk who I really am inside. This was the year 2014. And then at the end of it, I went on a water slide into a bleak depression that would destroy more than a year of my life, would rob me of the year 2015 that I don't remember much of. I just remember going to the psychiatrist mostly. Aside from that, it's just a blank emptiness, a blank nothingness of that year that would follow 2014. 2014, what a year, what a year. 2014 is the last year of my 20s. And actually, I lied to you. I really lied to you at the beginning of this video when I told you that I was diagnosed shortly after I turned 30. You see, I'm an idiot. I told you that I'm deluded and that I don't know what's going on. I had to look up this website, the age calculator, to find out my own age at different years. Now this sounds really strange, really odd. But really, yeah, you enter your date of birth there, and then you put different dates, and it tells you how old you were, except you were presumably supposed to put the dates of your great-grandmother or something, or your grandmother, not your own, because you're supposed to know how old you were at a given year. But not so much with myself. I thought I got diagnosed right after I turned 30, but it turns out that I was actually 28. In 2014, and I got diagnosed as I turned 29. But you see, in a way, even though this is an error, and who gives a shit that I lied to you at the beginning of this video? Because I mean, who actually is watching this at this moment? Who watched the beginning of the video? I mean, you have to check your own bipolar psychosis if you're still here. Well, anyway, it has a higher artistic truth. This is why I shouldn't modify my beginning. Because the truth is this: I lost the year 2015. I lost the 29th year of my life. So might as well say that when I turned 29, I might as well have turned 30, because it's gone, it's gone. And what died that year also was me. A part of me died. I don't mean to sound melodramatic, it's a little bit excessive, but it's completely true. I used to be this kind of person who was more open to the world. I might seem goofy now, but beyond this goofiness, there's a lot of bitterness and anger that simply wasn't there then. You know, you can see how goofy I am when I take out my pain and misery on you, and specifically your mother, and that fucking alarm clock that you once again fucking heard beep, because it's midnight now. It's midnight. Is Santa coming to town? No. Just me with more stories from my life. I used to be a kinder, better person. I used to watch Sex and the City. I used to feel a communion with humanity. I used to believe in them. I used to believe in people. Whereas now, even when I go to the grocery store, it's hard for me to just be around people. Not even standing in line, but just navigating around them in aisles. It's difficult. Everyday things piss me off. The sound of children angers me. I've become cold, I've become enclosed, I have become hidden. I wanted to be their messiah. I wanted to swim in these currents, but they denied me. The currents of my connection with people were crazy currents, and they're no longer there. The charge has been taken away from them by lithium and realization of mental illness. And so I'm just a different person. And I look at that person in my 20s, in that last year, the last year of life, the last year of freedom, the last year where I was just an untamed person without a diagnosis hovering over me, without the confines of this understanding. You know, I was a free-range fucking chicken, a free-range bipolar chicken. I just ran around and ran around toward the disaster, the slaughterhouse. But I had freedom and I was running around happily. I look at this all with a certain sense of nostalgia. I can remember even months, what different months meant to me in that year. Months mean nothing to me now. Weeks mean nothing. Everything is just a fucking blur. Kind of a blur, a more sober blur than before. Well, my friends, let's take a ride. Let's take a ride on the last real year of my life. If you live a boring middle class or upper middle class life, and yet you fancy yourself to be a writer, you really want to be a writer, I have a tip for you. I have a pro tip for you as a potential writer. Here's what you need to do. You need to take a leave of absence from your job as long as possible and look around for local companies that specialize in transporting poor people to their doctor's appointments. And just work at that company for a couple of months. They have a lot of turnover. They will be fine with you being there for 4 to 6 months or something. And as you drive these people, listen carefully. Open your fucking ears. Open those channels of communications. Because the taxi cab confessions you get there could be very, very powerful. And the stories that people will tell you could be very, very powerful. And even the location where you live in, especially in an economically segregated place like America, rigidly segregated, you will just kind of discover the place that you live from angles you were hardly aware of. This really was one of the most impactful and interesting jobs I ever had, driving around people around Cincinnati. In those few short months that I worked there, I heard stories of murders, of rapes, of betrayals, of abandonment by parents and children, of conspiracies. And it was a Dostoevsky ride. It was a Dosti ride across Cincinnati. I worked for a Russian company that didn't give a shit whether I lived or died. That was one of the problems. One time, the company car I was driving, its brakes were failing. It weren't failing a little bit like they are in my car right now, where, you know, sometimes there's a shaking in the wheel and I know where this train is going. This train is going with my current cargo van to where it's just gonna fucking eventually, it's gonna be like one of those attractions at an amusement park where you enter like the space shuttle and it starts to shake your ass. I've been there. You know, I'm just kind of fucking, I can't, you know, I don't fucking have the money to fix the brakes on this car. But that was a company car back then, and it literally wouldn't fucking stop. You know, I had to like stop 3 cars ahead of when I had to stop. Suddenly this emerged, and I called them, and I said, I'm driving people here, and the brakes are failing. And they're like, well, Ivan, just drive until the end of the day, you know, and we'll take a look at it. Now, this was like the middle of the day. I'm driving around in rain. There are steep hills here in Cincinnati, downtown Cincinnati. And they're like, just take it easy, Ivan, and just drive. Now, I was a big fucking pussy. And when you're fucking poor and you have no options, you can put up with this shit, though I shouldn't have. I should have fucking made an argument about it. But everything was so fucking disorganized. That's the kind of a fucking place it was. You know, and when I returned there, they even fucking forgot about the whole thing. I had to remind them, and he was like, blядь, you know, fucking shit. You know, I needed something from human resources there. And I asked my supervisor, Artyom. I was like, Artyom, where's the human resources fucking, who do I talk to? And he's like, yeah, you know, if you go into that room over there across the hall, and you see this girl with big tits, her name is Tanya. This is literally the level of professionals there. He's like, go over there in the room, see the girl with big tits and start talking to her. That's our fucking human resources department. You know, they had like a logistics map of downtown, and one of the guys there at the office, he's like, I made the downtown black for the color. You know, it's just, that was the fucking place everybody hated this company, the people who had to ride in it. Well, not everybody, but many people did. I mean, they came an hour late, etc., but they got their contract from the government. Half of the way it worked is that they had these drivers, Russian-speaking drivers, who didn't know English, and so they were like indentured serfs there at this company. They really had nowhere else to go because they didn't speak English. So they were just stuck there as serfs. And even though everybody referred to them as Russians, they were actually fucking Russian speakers. They were like from Uzbekistan. A lot of these guys like to, you know, like the bottle. You know, they like to drink and fucking, you know, people were afraid to ride with them. Well, anyway, so when they saw me, it was a sweet relief. And because none of them spoke English, they assumed some of our customers assumed no Russian could speak English. So they would talk shit to me about the Russians who weren't really Russians. Like I told one lady, actually I'm Russian. She was like fucking surprised. One girl asked me if I was white or I was Russian. Okay, I mean, she had some learning disabilities, okay? But anyway, it was an exciting fucking job, and I loved it. It would be exhausting to do now, but I certainly loved it back then. There was something else going on in my life as well. Something else has entered my life as well, and let's see if I can pronounce this. This is 5-hydroxytrophan 5-HTP, as I know it. And 5-HTP is kind of a supplement that you get, an antidepressant you get over the counter. And it was recommended to me by my super fan Dave, the fan of my blog. Dave really idealized me almost. I mean, it was almost kind of, it was almost awkward. It wasn't almost awkward, it was awkward. He basically regarded me as this genius with unrealized potential who was wasting his life. Now, I was wasting my life relative to whatever potential I had. I mean, there wouldn't need to be any great amount of potential for me to waste it relative to the scale of my wasting of life, if that makes sense. Even if my potential was like managing a McDonald's, I was still greatly wasting it just because of this massive amount of waste. But anyway, it was funny that on the one hand, here was this human being who kind of regarded me in a manic way that I regarded myself in a certain way. But on the other hand, it made me uneasy. So I guess I might be bipolar, but I'm not a complete psychopath, that I didn't find it naturally fitting. Well, anyway, Dave suffered from depression, and he really liked my writing about depression on my blog. And so he actually didn't suggest it, he gave me a gift of this 5-HTP and it arrived in the mail to me. Now the thing about this 5-HTP is that even though it's a supplement, it actually was shown in clinical studies to work on many people as an antidepressant. So you might as well consider it being an antidepressant that I start taking. And I start taking it heavily. Now, did it contribute to the mania that developed? It could very well have. The problem is that I no longer remember at which point I stopped taking it, and the whole kind of my issue overall developed over a course of a year, and I started taking it at the beginning of the year, but I just don't remember it. So I just kind of bring it up here as a footnote. A footnote that nevertheless could have been extremely important to the development of everything. So now, the job I was having driving these people was really intense, as I've indicated. And I used to work for like around 8 to 9 hours without break each and every day, and had to get up at like 7 or 6, I forget at this point. So I would drive to downtown Cincinnati, pick people up to their appointments on a schedule. During the second part of the day, I would call dispatch and they would tell me where to go and who to pick up on the schedule. So it was kind of a pretty hectic job. It took a lot of time, and when I came home I was exhausted. Exhaustion, getting up early in the morning, it spells one thing. It spells work forcing me into a regular sleeping schedule. So between the regular sleeping schedule and this antidepressant that, unlike venlafaxine, seemed to have actually been working for me, I was in a pretty good mood. And so for months before that, going back to Columbus, I was speaking with this girl, with a Seattle girl, with a Salvation girl. But now, in contrast to our previous communications, I actually started sounding relatively normal. No more kind of, I guess, my, you know, emo neediness that would always seep through. You try to be fucking nonchalant, but your kind of salty tears, you know, they drop on the floor and they betray you. Well, no longer. The salty tears have stopped for, I don't know how long, for like a few months. But for long enough for me to actually convince her to come and visit me here in Cincinnati. I would pay for the ticket and everything, but still, and she agreed. And that was like just an amazing moment in my life. She was so distant and so abstract for so long. We really haven't seen each other face to face that many times. We communicated through text, and she was just this distant figure in the fog, in the Seattle fog, a distant figure of salvation. And our romantic embrace, you know, her soothing fucking touch or whatever, it would heal my problems, as cartoonish as it is, but everything is grandiose and everything, and the neediness has metaphysical wings when you're starting to get manic. One of the things that happens with bipolar parents, and specifically bipolar men, is that when their wife gets pregnant and there is anticipation of the baby, they begin to collapse into mania. And actually, I've read an autobiography where a man had to be confined to a mental institution, a bipolar man, every time his wife had a child because his brain couldn't handle it. Now, this is unfortunately, it was a tragedy for that man. He obviously didn't want that to happen. It was obviously difficult for the wife, who now had to contend with childbirth and the mental illness of her spouse. But the reason I bring this up is because I had none of this when my 3 kids in the Philippines were born, okay? It's just something I decided to mention, okay? Well, you like that joke, do you like that joke? Oh, forget about it, okay? Forget about it. The reason I bring it up is because during this time of childbirth, of potential parenthood, a lot of thoughts are swirling in your mind, in a mind of any person. Baby names, finances, all the stress, all the excitement, everything. And if you're predisposed toward bipolar, you could see how that kind of stress and excitement could spin you into a mania, into a crash. Well, unfortunately, in the context of my sad and lonely life, in this context, her arrival really had a similar effect on me. So this is in no way to blame her for my unraveling, but I was supercharged by this. I was thinking about it all the time. I was so excited and so happy. And potentially with the contribution from the supplement, I started spinning out of control, spinning into greatness and infamy, but basically into a depressive disaster later on. So one thing that was going on is this girl started getting a little bit elusive. She was starting to get a little bit distant. Now this wasn't super ethical because I wasn't creepy or anything. Maybe some neediness have emerged, but nothing really new. I never like texted her 10 times a day or even every day or whatever. You know, but she has her own kind of issues, and she was distant, and sometimes she would disappear, even though she agreed to come over and I bought the tickets, etc. Sometimes she would disappear. And one time she disappeared for a pretty long time, for like a week or two. And I was so kind of eager with anticipation that when she finally replied and apologized, like I literally remember the place in Cincinnati where I pulled over at that time. And an electric shock went through my body. It meant so much to me that this girl was coming to see me. I loved her so much. I loved her so much. So the first thing, the strange thing that I noticed, and actually to be fair, I haven't noticed it at the time, of course, I just noticed it in retrospect, is my preoccupation with license plates. I was driving around and suddenly I got fixated on license plates. I got fixated on numerology. What was lucky and what was not. This kind of a search for meaning in numbers is indicative of psychosis. You see it in schizophrenics, you see it in people with bipolar disorder, with developing psychosis. Because what happens, like what connects a lot of psychotic events like paranoia, or I mean, in many cases you're just seeing patterns where there are not. You're seeing connections and meanings where there are no connection and meaning. And so if I had an anticipation for the future, if I had a thought and I wanted it to be validated, I wanted to see those lucky specific numbers in front of me on the license plate, and I would continuously throughout the day, I would change lanes to be in the right lane with the right car behind me. It was a big preoccupation unless I absolutely couldn't do it because I had to get somewhere faster or something. This was what I thought about every day. I rearranged different numbers in my head. Different numbers became lucky or unlucky. Number 2 and number 4 were very lucky. Number 4 was the luckiest. And I can't remember all this bullshit now. But this really was consuming to me. And so suddenly, like a lotus, more things started to unravel out of this numerology. And the biggest one, of course, was Agvan Dorjev. Once again, this idea returned to me. Well, it wasn't an idea, it was a certainty, of course, because I was starting to develop mania. But the interesting thing about this overall manic period is, for one thing, it was prolonged. It lasted for a long time, for months. It was just a period of intense, I don't know, like intensity, I guess. But I wasn't as powerfully manic as in the first time. Okay, so in this case, I didn't really believe that I was going to be the president of Russia, so that one was out. I was just Agvan Dorjev, and I was going to help Tibet in the future through my various activities. But on top of that grandiose idea, there wasn't a bigger idea on top of it, like becoming the president of Russia. This was it. Agvan Dorjev was it. But now the girl became a part of this delusion as well. The Seattle girl now, you see, there was a reason, okay? There was a reason that our relationship didn't work out, that there wasn't a right away a natural connection. There were actually 2 reasons. Number 1, of course, it came to my mind. I finally realized that, of course, in my previous life, I was a simple monk. I was a simple monk and a celibate monk. And therefore, I wasn't used to relationship with women. So I was awkward around them, and I had a natural kind of a, you see, like there was a natural kind of oil and water type of shit because I was so committed to my vows in the previous life. In fact, there were a couple of reasons that I came up with why I was Agvan Dorjev in my previous life, so I'll just list them now. Well, one reason was that when I was a child, I didn't like to wear shorts. I never wanted to wear shorts or show my legs. Naturally, this was connected with the fact that monks never do this. Their legs are covered. It couldn't be for any other reason, okay? Then there was the idea, the preoccupation I had with the number 4 before I came to Seattle. And I still have somewhat of a preoccupation with the number 4. The reason number 4 is so important is because it is a foundational number in Buddhism. The first thing the Buddha revealed when he obtained enlightenment were the 4 noble truths. And it clearly indicated to me that my obsession with the number 4 that predated my conversion to Buddhism clearly indicated that this was an imprint from a previous life that guided me toward the connection with my roots that would then flower into my activities as the recognized reincarnation of Agvan Dorjev. Another clear indicator of my past life was my preoccupation with rosaries. Before I became a Buddhist and I lived in Columbus, I used to collect rosaries. I don't have these rosaries anymore, but I would have a few Catholic and a few Russian Orthodox rosaries, and I would look at them and I had the idea of kind of using them on the bus, reciting them for relaxation on the bus while I was going to college. Now this is a strange idea in and of itself, a kind of perhaps a mentally ill idea, but anyway, this preoccupation with the rosaries was important because, of course, there are the mala in Tibetan Buddhism. You use it for recitation of mantras, to recite them hundreds and thousands of times throughout your life. And the final indicator that I can remember that I had in my mind was the fact that during my time in college, I had multiple pictures of the Dalai Lama in my apartment, which is true. I had like 2 or 3 pictures of the Dalai Lama, I think 2, among many other pictures that I had, but I truly didn't know who he was at the time. I had no clear reason for having these pictures. So the reason that I put together these pictures clearly indicated that I had a karmic connection with His Holiness from my previous life. Now there could be no other indication, no other reason for those pictures to be there, okay? Have I convinced you yet? Have I convinced you? Now the plot thickens at this point because I actually had another reason, another explanation as to why my relationship with the girl was not working out, while we had so many obstacles in the previous years. And the reason was this. You see, she was my sister in a previous life. Now, maybe not even in the life of Agvan Dorjev, but perhaps before. We were very close and we really had that spiritual connection going back lifetimes because she was my sister at some point. In our life, when we were actual blood siblings, there was some sort of a tragedy, something happened, some traumatic event. And so on the one hand, we had this connection. On the one hand, it's almost like the connection was a little too tight because we were fucking brother and sister, you know? But eventually this would be overcome because our relationship was bigger than just a romantic affair naturally. It was meant to be some sort of like a tantric union between us with potential enlightenment ramifications, a kind of enlightenment blowback, maybe for a lot of people, maybe for the universe. I don't remember at this point, but it was something very powerful. It wasn't just about sex and shopping at Whole Foods. Fucking no, man. It was just, it must have been much bigger than that. And so in this case, it wasn't really incest. It was an incest because the aim were higher. And then anyway, man, don't fucking dwell on it. It was like 2 or 3 lifetimes ago. Okay, when we were siblings. Don't fucking dwell on it, okay? Let's just fucking forget it. So you might ask yourself, with all of these things, well, no fucking wonder she didn't reply to you in texts. No wonder she ignored you for weeks, you crazy fucknut. And here I have to tell you something I probably should have mentioned before. And it's that all these delusions, I never shared them with anybody. Now, when I was the new Ivan for those couple of weeks, I might have said something along the lines of like, haha, like I'm gonna be the president of Russia in a jokey way so that everybody would laugh, but then, you know, wait until the future and they'd find out, you know, that this was no fucking joke. I might have shared something at that point just because I was the new Ivan. But in my regular self, when I experienced any of these delusions, I didn't share them with anybody. There was something private. It's kind of like when you have a private business plan or a private idea that you're waiting for in the future, you almost don't want to spoil it by telling it to people, on the one hand. And on the other hand, there was still a part of my brain functioning, unless I was completely crazy and fucking new Ivan, that we need to censor this stuff. It has to kind of flower naturally. I mean, after all, these things are gonna come true eventually. And yet they will sound crazy now, so no need to share it. So I didn't tell any of this to her. I didn't tell any of this to her. It was something going on in my head. It's like, you know, you have religious Christians who are convinced that the world is going to end, and yet they go about their life as usual. They're completely convinced of it. Well, that's kind of something that's been going on throughout my life. So naturally, I didn't tell her any of this. It was just a powerful swirl, a powerful symphony in my own head. But when it came to interacting with other people, I was completely normal, and you wouldn't be able to tell that there was anything going on with me. In all likelihood, though, her female intuition picked up on this intensity one way or another. And yet, nevertheless, she came. She came, I picked her up at an airport, she gave me a hug, and I nervously drove her home. And what followed next during this trip was like a dark comedy, but to really kind of appreciate this comedy, you would have to be me, with my load of expectations, with all the metaphysical pressures that wanted me to make this work. In the context of all of that, what happened next was rather humorous on a very subtle level. Nobody was laughing. Certainly I wasn't laughing, but I can laugh about it now, because it was just a very strange trip and a very strange way to hang out with somebody, especially when you have all this loaded meaning and expectation invested into this trip, invested into this event. So what transpired is this. We started driving to different places around Ohio because Ohio is kind of boring and you really have to go far to find things to do. if you're visiting. So the first trip I naturally took her on was to Greenville, Ohio. What happened in Greenville, Ohio? Well, this was where my friend was, who was dying of cancer. This is the guy who I used to transport for that medical company, a job that I now quit because it was just difficult to continue there. I took her to see this guy. I don't know why I did this. I mean, it's a very stupid decision. But anyway, we went there. We stopped at some farmer's market, and she picked up a peach from this kind of old guy, a kind of a folksy old guy. I just remember this because this is the kind of stuff I never do. I just drive to people dying of cancer, okay? And this guy, you know, we just hang out and exchanged a few words, and she stood awkwardly by. So this was the beginning of this amazing journey together. And then we just drove to different places. I really wanted to go to the zoo, and she God, this is so fucking stupid. I really wanted to go to the zoo, and she indulged me. I just had these kind of stupid ideas. Now, I wasn't on like many dates or interactions with ladies over the years in this context. So it's just like the zoo, I guess, for some reason I had an idea that's where people go. Now, when we got to the zoo, I met this like Greek Orthodox priest. And we got into this long discussion about the nature of Orthodox Christianity and how Peter the Great's reforms of the church in Russia have really undermined it. You know, we talked, she kind of stood by the side. The father was really kind of disappointed that I became a Buddhist. Clearly he saw the rambling spiritual potential in me. So this was really the highlight of the zoo. What I didn't realize is, as a Buddhist, going to the zoo is just a horrible thing to do. Because there were like elephants neurotically pacing in circles. There were giraffes there with blank, empty eyes, and flamingos. It was just a horrible place. I was really kind of almost traumatized being there, seeing all these animals in like little confines, etc. And this, of course, was a zoo. We might have passed or might have even seen this iconic animal, or at least an animal that was unknown at that point, who would later become a meme. And that, of course, is Harambe. We've passed the sacred beast, probably unknowingly, later on. Now there's a memorial there somewhere to fucking Harambe. So this was it. This was not a good omen, I guess. I guess Harambe was stingy with the blessing of supernatural Buddhist romance. And we left the zoo. We also went to other places that were better than the zoo. We went to the Buffalo Trace Distillery, which is where they make bourbon in Kentucky, which is a pretty cool place. I mean, if you're ever in these parts, you can go to this Buffalo Trace Distillery. It kind of looks like, if you took a black and white picture of it, it kind of looks like a concentration camp, Buchenwald or something. But it's kind of a cool place. You get a nice tour. They have souvenirs. I'm not into fucking bourbon or whiskey. I hardly ever fucking drink, but she was. She knew a lot about it. She really knew a lot about it. And so we went there, and we also went to Columbus. Now, each one of these drives is like at least an hour and some minutes back and forth. And yet the amazing thing about it is that we didn't talk. Now, you think that spending so much time together, or kind of driving in the car, being in a confined space for hours together, it would result in some sort of a long conversation, but it was amazing. I mean, this girl should have been working for like the KGB or something back in the day, because she revealed nothing, literally next to nothing. We hardly ever spoke during that time. She took this, and this wasn't like silent treatment or anything like that. This was just her natural pace of interaction with me. You know, our interactions before were sporadic and in texts that appeared here and there, and why change anything now? So she just took this opportunity to nap in the car, and I'm not kidding you, she would do origami. She would literally do origami in the car in silence. So she had like a little origami set that she would take out, like these little folding papers, and she would look at the instructions. She's like, look at the swan I made. She made swans. She made little kind of collages of these things. You know, she made little kitties and drew like very cute little eyes to them. And it was just a different kind of a fucking origami fucking road trip with Ivan. It was just amazing. I really had this origami saved for sentimental reasons, but then recently I threw it all out because, like, how long can I torture myself with? And actually, once I started taking lithium, some of that edge from this fixation on her actually worn off. A lot of it has worn off, and even though I creeped recently on her Instagram, I creeped without any great emotion, I have to confess. And I honestly believe that time was a factor, but lithium blunted the nuttiness of this whole thing, and I just fucking finally relaxed with it. Maybe she's too old for me now. Oh, it's just a little joke. Sometimes we did interact, and she would take little kind of grumpy jabs at me. Real kind of little kind of attacks. So for example, when she first came, she decided to cook some fried rice, make some fried rice. I was really happy about it. And she's like, I'm gonna teach you how to cook. And now I fucking don't cook shit. I just use the microwave. Every once in a while I'll expand to the oven, like for frozen pizza or something, but I never cooked in my life. It's just one of these routine tasks that I can't commit myself to. I would rather kill myself with fucking preservatives and different kind of shit that I eat. Well, anyway, she was doing it, and I was kind of following along half-heartedly, not really expecting. And she's like, she's like, then she says, like, I don't want to cook for you unless you're gonna, like, learn. And I was like, what the fuck? Anyway, she did cook, but she was kind of grumpy in the end. It was like, she wouldn't cook for me. I had to learn. But I'm not gonna fucking make fried rice. But she was a pretty good cook, all right? It turned out fine. Now, one time, we were at this Buffalo Trace fucking bourbon fucking distillery, and the tour guide said, some people say there are ghosts in here. And so I turned to her and I say, are you afraid of ghosts? And she turns to me and she says, why do you always tell me that I'm afraid of something? It's like, I don't remember telling her anything. She's probably like making origami in the car as we got there or something. Anyway, I had to pout a little bit about this one. This was unacceptable. So I just pouted around and I separated myself from the group, and then she came over to me later on and said something, and this kind of counted as an apology in the context of our relationship. So I just kind of drove around like this. It just was awesome. It was fucking awesome. And then on one of these days, I introduced her to my friends, and by my friends it was just that girl Caitlin, my first American friend who I recently unfriended on Facebook. Okay, so we met with her at like some hipster bar in Cincinnati. You know, they started talking, and this girl who was silent for so long started like talking at a very fast pace. And what was she talking about? It was like Hello Kitty type cuteness. She's like, I love kitties, you know, and like she took out her like Hello Kitty wallet or something, and a lot of other like little kitty items that she was like really excited, and I haven't seen her this animated during this whole trip. And she's like, I love kitties. I call Thursday, I call Purse Day. And I was like, who is this person? Like, who is this woman? Like, I've known her for years, hypothetically, but I don't know who she is. To this day, I have no idea who she really is. Because this was just odd. She was really animated about Hello Kitty type stuff and cats and fucking Purse Day. I didn't understand what's going on, but this is, I guess, why I loved her. A lot of other people, if they were like insects, I can pin them down and look at them. Now my kind of a pin down, my analysis of who you are might be incomplete or incorrect, but I feel that it is. But with her, I couldn't pin her down ever, and to this day. And that, I guess, is just a kind of that's what I'm into. This is what I'm into, seemingly. Now, it wasn't all bad. Because one day we took a bottle of wine, I think even two, and we just drank them. We watched a documentary about a Buddhist Lama, controversial Buddhist Lama, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, called Crazy Wisdom. We watched it for a while, and then I passed out, because I don't really drink that much. When I woke up, I said, you know, what happened to him? Now, this was a lie. Even as drunk as I was, I watched that documentary 100 times. And she said, he died. That's my baby. That's what she said. He died. Thanks. Thanks, babe. No, I love her. She's awesome. Okay, she's awesome. So after this, we kind of made out a little bit, and it was kind of romantic and nice. So the next day, I think it was the last day or whatever of this amazing trip, of this amazing intersection of souls. I had to really, now I couldn't of course tell her all my crazy delusions and all the kind of brother-sister incest, metaphysical incest. Naturally, I couldn't bring this up. But because I saw things kind of going down the hill, I had to hint at this. So I told her, hey, let's go for a walk. It was like the night before I would take her to the airport. Let's take for a walk. Well, she was reluctant, but she agreed. And so we went around here, and there is like a shitty pond here, man. If you're ever around these parts, there's a little fucking pond and a little park around it. And so we just started making circles around this pond. And I told her, I might look like a loser now. I don't have much going on. I live with my mother. And it seemed seemingly like I'm a nothing. But I said, actually, I have a lot of ambitions. And they're all, and I said, I literally said I'm a magician.
And how can this be? For he is the Kwisatz Haderach.
Or something like that. I'm pretty sure I said I have some magic, I'm a magician, and this was supposed to be vague and kind of broad. I mean, that could include, like, I'm a magician could include a lot of sentiments and a lot of possibilities, all right? Now, it could mean a lot of things, man. It could be like an archetype for being a reincarnated llama who was your brother in a previous life. I'm a magician, okay? And she's like, what kind of a magician are you? I don't remember what I said to this. She's like, I know, she's like, I know you're not a loser, whatever. Well, which girl would say, I know you're a loser, okay? So anyway, so this was our walk around the park in darkness. And then we headed back home, and as we were walking, I gave her like a playful bump, you know, how you do in romantic movies or whatever. And she's like, you don't know how tall you are, and you don't know like what it means to me, like when that happens or something. Like I fucking raped her or something with this bump. And then she just started walking really fast, and oh man, this is too good. And just kind of, hid in this room. And then I had to text her to apologize that I gave her this bump. And then finally entered her room, and everything was fine. During this whole process, I gave her a gift. She likes Pringles. I gave her some Pringles when she first got here. But I also gave her a book, and that book is Master and Margaret by the Russian author Mikhail Bulgakov. Mikhail Bulgakov had a really tough life. At one point, now if you read Russian history, maybe you'll relate to it. But he was a physician, and times were tough. And he had a child with one of his mistresses, but this child didn't see the light of day because Michael Bulgakov aborted his own child, like as a physician. So this is edgy and tough, man. This is Russian history. Fucking put it on Tumblr and fucking seal it. Talk about fucking pro-choice. Anyway, Mikhail Bulgakov was on the run from the authorities. He thought he was going to get arrested, and he was just running around hiding in the woods. And then he finally came back to his apartment, and he got a call. And guess who's on the other side of the line? It was Stalin. And Stalin said, "Oh, Michael, I heard you were disappointed with us or something, upset with us." It was just Stalin humor. He was a horrible human being, but he did some humor, and Stalin basically stopped the persecution of Bulgakov, even though a lot of his things weren't published. Well, anyway, he wrote this book that was banned in the Soviet Union for a long time, and it was written in secret. And the book described the coming of Satan to the Soviet Union in disguise. And it also, in parallel, described this love affair between this defeated intellectual, basically Mikhail Bulgakov, Master, and Margaret. And in some way, I wanted this to be the theme for our relationship, because pity is an important aspect in my hypothetical ideal romance. Pity for myself. Okay, I want it to be worthy of sacred pity, I guess. Unfortunately, it sounds very crude to say this about yourself, but this is true. I even didn't plan to say it just now, but I did. But anyway, the part I would wish her to focus on is the part where Master describes how he fell in love with Margaret. And that's because he said, I noticed her sad eyes. And this is what I noticed about this girl. She really had fucking the saddest eyes in the world. An attractive girl, along with her kind of mysterious, elusive nature that you could never grasp. It was a winning combination for a fixation that lasted through much of my 20s. And she read the whole book. And it's like, maybe on Purse Day. But anyway, she read the whole book. I mean, she had a lot of time. Since we weren't interacting that much, she read it in a couple of days and liked it. But nothing clicked. And if it did, it probably would have been a disaster. Because both of us have mental illness issues of one sort or another. And in a sense, like, in both of our cases, we related to each other because of them. But in my case, it manifested in what it manifested in. And in her case, it just didn't. It just didn't click in some fundamental way. There was some relation, there was a level of affection, and she probably thought she was doing me a huge favor by coming, which in effect she was. But there was a kind of a celebrity surf type of interaction sometimes. Anyway, I don't really hold it against her. I think it's fine. I don't have negative thoughts associated with her. Here's the alarm again. What the fuck is going on? It's like something is fucking beeping every time. Anyway, she's a beautiful girl, and I wish her all the luck in the world. And actually, when she flew back in Seattle, she gave me a hug, and we resumed our normal texting correspondence as if nothing transpired, because in a sense, nothing did for her, but everything transpired for me. A pretty amazing thing happened when the girl left, and this was one of the best experiences of my life, courtesy of the bipolar disorder. What happened is this: I was under so much stress on the one hand, but on the other hand, I was still surfing on my metaphysical Buddhist winds. I was still in the flow. I still had that righteous and beautiful energy within me. And so I had to process this event somehow. And I processed it with some salty tears. Now, contrary to my using crying as a continuous kind of a gag or a metaphor, I want to inform you that the hypermasculine man that I am, I actually haven't cried as an adult. And so this was my real first cry in my adult life that happened after she left. I loved her so much, and now she was gone. But because I was manic, because I was in the midst of the spiritual mania, it couldn't just be about my disappointment, about my hurt. It had to assume a cosmic scale. And so when I had that cry, what went through me is all the suffering of humanity. And I'm not joking. All the people that I've driven around, people who were raped, people who were mangled by life, people who were dying of cancer, like that man I took her to see in Greenville, who's almost certainly dead by now. He told me a story that I'll never forget when he called his estranged father to tell him that he had this lethal form of cancer. I mean, of course, they're all lethal, but one that would expand rapidly and likely kill him in a few months. And his father told him, can you call back? I'm cooking pasta right now. So all these types of events that have really kind of impacted me, they kind of flushed through me at that moment. So it wasn't really just about my suffering. My own kind of suffering in this instance and being heartbroken was just a catalyst for the whole thing. And it was just an amazing experience that I can't really put into words adequately. I wept for humanity. I wept for all sentient beings. I really had a moment in that energy field, in that kind of a powerful force hitting me. I really had a moment of universal compassion, or something approximating it, or at least as close as I could get. Something that most people probably didn't experience in their life. And it was just a powerful event. Once I was done with it, I didn't care that this girl wasn't into me. I didn't care about anything. I was just in this sublime high state. Everything was kind of flushed through me. My attachments, my human petty desires and concerns, all disappeared for a very brief period of time. I'm not going to overdo it. I mean, probably the whole thing lasted for like 20 minutes or something, but it was something that I'll never forget. And I texted her about it, and I tried to explain it as best I could without making myself seem insane. And she said, "It's good to have a cry." Smiley face. Fucking awesome. I love that girl. She's awesome. Now, thankfully, I didn't stay lonely for long. I actually had another girl in my life, you could say. Another presence, feminine presence in my life. She was compassionate, she was playful, she had a sense of humor, and she shared my spiritual values. You guessed it, my friend. It was Bodhisattva White Tara, or actually different manifestations of Tara. Let me describe her from this meditation card I used at the time to telepathically communicate with her. Known as she who bears the cries of the world, somebody had to bear my salty cries, my salty tears at least. Tara will always come to your aid when you call. Her color is white as an autumn moon and clear as a stainless crystal gem. She radiates an uncompromising light of purity. She is truth, complete and undifferentiated. Within each of us is the goddess of compassion, White Tara. Manifest as White Tara, the goddess of active compassion, and shower this planet with pure love. It sounds awesome. And this is the mantra. Tara, Tu, Tara, Turi, Swaha. So this is the mantra I would recite at the time. Here's another aspect of Tara. Another quality of feminine principle which Tara embodies is playfulness. Tara is frequently depicted as a young 16-year-old girlish woman. She often manifests in the lives of Dharma practitioners when they take themselves or the spiritual path too seriously. There are Tibetan tales in which she laughs at self-righteousness or plays pranks on those who lack reverence for the feminine. This is my relationship with Tara. You see, at the time I was on a downward slide. I was unraveling. I wanted to have a compassionate presence in my life who would urge me on. And in my mind, I started communicating with Tara. Now, be relieved that I didn't actually hear voices, but I thought that there were thoughts coming from Tara into my head, communications. And the only thing that could obstruct them would be my attachments or my own thoughts, projecting my own desires and needs onto this pure communications. And so I would try very hard with the recitation of the mantra, with focus, etc., to purify actual thoughts of Tara. But I literally felt her almost like stroking my head and my face because I was so lonely and needed that encouragement. Now, in the landscape of my meaning, I was like a hero of unrealized potential who needed encouragement, who was kind of like in these Hollywood movies where you have some sort of a weird fuck who's falling apart, who's a complete loser, but nevertheless he has a great path ahead of him and he needs encouragement. And that's essentially what Tara did as I was disintegrating and falling apart into complete depression. So this relationship with Tara was helping me hold myself together, helping me not lose that light of meaning within me. Another person, or I should say, another entity who appeared in my head at the time and played a crucial role in this period was Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava is this fierce person who, according to the religious narrative, introduced Buddhism to Tibet. At the time, it was a polytheist society with different gods, local deities ruling the land and receiving the worship of the people. And Padmasambhava would do spiritual battles with these local deities, either converting them to Buddhism or completely destroying them. So this was Padmasambhava. So on the one hand, you had this feminine, caring, playful presence in my life, kind of encouraged me forward. On the other hand, Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, was another presence, if you like, masculine, forceful, manic presence. And together, I was appealing to them continuously. Appealing to them, maybe not realizing that at the time, but appealing not to let me slide into a horrible depression, which maybe I was feeling at the back of my mind. And literally in this room right now where I'm filming, I would do full body prostrations continuously, day in and day out, to them. And as I was doing them, I could almost, in the same way that I almost felt that presence of the goddess of nature, who might have been Tara in a different emanation in college, in a similar way I almost could feel their presence in the room, even though again I never saw anything that wasn't there or explicitly heard them. I just had these strong delusions that were verging on reality. And you know, my friends, actually making this very video has reconnected me with Tara, because making this video has been making me entirely insane. I've been losing sleep over this. I had a period of a very intense small depression. I had that Buddha's dominion awaken in me. Things have been stirring within me that have been dormant for a long time, because I've started recollecting my life and starting to once again realize and awaken to the fact of how powerful bipolar disorder have been in my life, how much it defined my life. It's almost like this dormant octopus that has been confined by lithium started stirring again in myself, started awakening again. It's like you think you killed the roach, it's kind of moving very slowly, and then suddenly, with part of its body quashed, it takes off and disappears under the table. This is what's going on with me right now, and it's a strange experience. It's a strange experience. Maybe I'm going crazy. So for example, yesterday I was filming another part of this video that nobody's gonna watch. I didn't think it was gonna be this long. I'm stupid, but I didn't think it was gonna be this long. And I was filming another part of it, and I remembered my whole relationship with Tara. And once I got done filming, I accidentally did this. I disconnected the light and everything went dark. I didn't have that other light on. Everything was submerged in darkness. And then I reconnected it again, and I went on to retrieve my card, the card you put into the video camera, the SanDisk, the memory card. I couldn't find it. I literally couldn't find it anywhere. And I started looking around the room. Now I've been recording, and I probably had like, I don't know, an hour of recording there that took me like 2 hours to complete or something, and I just couldn't find it anywhere. And I literally started crawling around, looking at my clothes, checking different places, and this memory card just completely vanished. It completely vanished from sight, and I couldn't believe it. I never had an object disappear like that before. I was just flabbergasted. I mean, even that card alone costs like $40 or something. Even that alone would be bad enough without wasting hours filming this stuff. And then finally, at some point, I found it on a black cap of a container of toothpicks. And it just completely melded with the cap, that is to say, it completely disappeared into the cap, and I couldn't see it. I was looking for it for like 20 minutes or something. And who did I think about when I found it there? I thought about Tara yesterday playing a trick on me, because I haven't thought of her in a long time. It was a completely, well, I would say it was a possibility. And I went to my Buddhist altar, which is actually hidden behind this curtain. I retrieved this meditation card. I bowed to it. You see, nowadays I have a dual core processor, and that's exactly the symbol for it. There's one reality core, presumably, and then there's another core that could potentially pick up if the reality core gets too weak. Who knows? It's the official party line that I'm not Agvan Dorjev. But maybe, just kidding, you know, life is so fucking boring, why not? This brings me to the most ridiculous episode of my manic life. Now, remember how earlier I told you how the music, the elevated music of mood, can be profound in and of itself, but the text that you have to compose around it, the text of delusions that your quote-unquote rational mind that ceases to be rational the more the music rises, how that text could be completely and utterly profane and ridiculous. Well, this was the biggest case of it, of this phenomenon in my life. I was sitting in my car. my 1999 Acura RL that I inherited from my stepfather. I was sitting in its leather seats and communicating with Tara. I was communicating with Tara in the parking lot of a very large grocery store. And the subject was lottery. That's right. I wanted to play the lottery, and I wondered if Tara would bless me.
For those who push themselves beyond all limits, whose desire to win is unsurpassed, for those building enough strength to scratch and exhale, the Ohio Lottery welcomes you to the Summer Games. Monopoly, Variety Bingo Tripler, and soon Spicy Hot Cash and Break the Bank. Games that will test your well-conditioned skills. And higher payouts mean even more cash, more prizes, and more fun. Good luck, noble warriors, and let the Summer Games begin.
So this was at a time of great desperation. This was at the pinnacle between my metaphysical pressures, my momentum, my spiritual momentum, my karmic flow from my previous glorious lives, colliding with the wave of depression that would eventually sweep me away. So I was really desperate. I was desperate, and in fact, even though this was about money, this was also not about money. It was about reaffirming the fact that I was chosen by the universe for something, for some special mission. For so long I've been wandering in the deserts, hearing different voices, stumbling in different directions. And now I wanted to taste that fountain of fresh water that would magically appear out of the desert and bless my life. This was what it was all about at that moment. I needed to play the lottery so I could win money, so I don't have to work, so I can use that money for the benefit of all beings down the line. Completely ridiculous, completely profane, has nothing to do with Buddhism, and yet here I was. And this was also the moment when I was doing my kind of telepathic communication with Tara, trying to purify that communication aside from my own desires, my own voices that I would be projecting on Tara irrationally. When you're communicating with the Bodhisattva, you don't want your voices in your head interfering with the purity of communication. Alright, my friends, you have to remember that if you want to get into the game. And of course, a part of me, the rational part of me, was saying that this whole thing is ridiculous. You're desperate, you're pathetic, you just have to stop and leave. And yet, it seemed to me that the voice of Tara told me to do it, even though there was conflict. I was sitting there for a few minutes, really having this conflict in my head, whether a bodhisattva, a Buddhist deity, would bless me playing the Ohio Lottery. This is where I was. And so I went in there, I bought a few tickets, I never played the lottery. I never do, it's stupid. Okay, it's stupid. Naturally, I didn't win anything. As I was driving away, all the voices stopped, and I felt completely alone in the world. You see, there was always like this spark of meaning, the spark of being chosen. Maybe I was not entitled to it, it was delusional, but it sustained me, and now it was just flushed out. And I was no longer communicating with anybody. There was silence around me, a hollow silence. I was just a deluded loser. On some way, I began to realize this. And this was a very painful event. It's like, you know, there were people who really idealized the Soviet Union, intellectuals in the West. And when news began to filter out about the scale of Stalinist repressions, their whole world crashed around them, and some of them committed suicide. And I could relate to it, because as ridiculous of an event as this was, it was profound for me at the time. Even for me at this moment, I can't really connect with the pain I experienced at that point, because it is so fucking absurd to want a deity to bless you fucking playing the numbers in Ohio. It's just so stupid. But this is where I was. This was the pinnacle of manic obscenity. Every corrupt regime at one point or another reaches its heights of obscenity, of its lavish decadence. It happened in France before the revolution swept it aside, with the women having these giant wigs in form of ships, with men wearing extraordinary clothes, with them dining in these lavish, disgusting banquets while the peasants starved, and then it all came to a crash. Well, my mania has become that. It's just become too resplendent, too fat, too self-satisfied, and now it popped into a revolution. And on the opposite side, on the opposite side of the barricades, were the black banners of depression, and they began to advance. They began to advance and dominate my life, forcing me into retreat. I never thought of concentration, the power to focus your attention, or the inability to focus your attention, as being one of the primary aspects of depression. That's not exactly how I experienced depression in the past, and I thought that inability to concentrate was like a secondary symptom to just the overall sense of hollowness and misery that depression brings. But in the case of my Great Depression that was now beginning to spread its wings, this was not the case. In fact, concentration went out first before anything else. It was kind of somewhat of an amazing thing to experience, because I was just losing my ability to focus in drastic ways before my very eyes. And this registered for the first time when I got a job. The lottery didn't work out, the metaphysical lottery, and I just got another job working customer service. I got a job at a local bank over the phone, just kind of the stuff that I did before, and I just wasn't able to focus on the job. I literally wasn't able to do the job. I would stare at the screen and not know what was going on. I had a call with an older gentleman who was confused about his balance and who might have had dementia. He just didn't understand where the money was going, even though it was right there in front of them. But I also didn't understand what was going on, because I was out of it. We were looking at the same statements on different sides of the phone, and this went on for like 20-30 minutes until my supervisor came over and said, "What is going on? You have to terminate the call. Normal calls there last for like 3 to 5 minutes or something." One time I was sitting with a coworker in the cafeteria and I wasn't able to continue the conversation. I just started zoning out. I just wasn't able to form coherent thoughts and express them in sentences. Literally, I was just sitting across from him and I couldn't say anything. It was kind of a strange thing to behold about yourself. He said, "That's okay. I just said something like, oh, I have this sometimes. I didn't get enough sleep." And he said, "That's okay," but I'm pretty sure he thought I was on drugs when I said it. And so I just couldn't go to this work anymore. But I didn't want to tell my mother that I quit it. And so I would just hide in the park. I would just drive to the local park and hide in there and sit there to wait out the workday and then come back home. One of those days I started talking with a nice gentleman, and he told me how he came over from Guatemala and was working at the church. As we were talking further and further, I realized he was gay and he was there to pick up men, and that was his interest. So that was kind of awkward because I was getting more and more depressed and I wanted a human connection, but maybe this was not the connection I was looking for. I mean, he was nice, and it's not like I'm not homophobic or angry about it or anything, but it was just a humorous thing that happened. Here I decided to get an easier job. A job where concentration didn't mean the same as it did working at the office, and that was a driving job. I applied for a position and got accepted. This position was driving an ambulette. An ambulette is basically a van that looks like an ambulance, but in fact it's just there to transport handicapped patients from point A to point B from different hospitals. And this was the worst job I could possibly accept at that moment, because the people we were transporting were people who were housed in government hospitals for the poor. And the people I saw there were just profoundly unlucky. They were just profoundly unlucky in life. I mean, you'd walk into one of these hospitals and you see women with Alzheimer's just staring into space, and you think about their lives, their childhood, their families that have basically abandoned them now that their brains have deteriorated. Seeing people with Alzheimer's is one of my biggest traumatic events in life, I have to say. I mean, seeing a person with Alzheimer's is profoundly disturbing, and I could almost recall every time I've encountered a person with Alzheimer's. I'm way less afraid of death than I am afraid of dementia and Alzheimer's. It's just a scary world to live in when you can't formulate your reality. It was scary to not be able to formulate sentences or thoughts, but not to even have access to your memories, to live in this fog. It's just the scariest thing of all, and it was just disturbing. There was a woman at one of these nursing homes that just kept saying, like an old woman kept saying, "I need to pee, I need to pee." And I told the nurse, and the nurse was like, well, she just always says it, you don't have to pay attention for her. And there was just a woman kind of abandoned by humanity in a way. She just lives in this world where she constantly needs to use the restroom. We transported a man I referred to earlier who had clinical depression so bad that he wasn't able to speak. He was catatonic. He was completely paralyzed by it. He tried to kill himself multiple times. His wife has died in one of these nursing homes, and all he wanted was death. He couldn't achieve death, and so he had paralysis. And that's what I saw just in 1 week of training. So naturally, I couldn't stick around in my own mental state that was getting bleaker and bleaker by every day. Another important event that was going on at the time is that I was reading the book, I think it was called Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist by Stephen Batchelor.
Now on Beliefs, a fascinating guy who argues you can be a Buddhist atheist. He had a shaved head and wore a robe every day. He studied with the Dalai Lama. Then he had a crisis of faith.
And Stephen Batchelor was an idealist, one of these hippies who went into India because he heard about monks who would avoid stepping on insects, and he was inspired by their compassion. And he spent years in a monastery and then went into different traditions of Buddhism and basically became disenfranchised with Buddhism as a religion and just practices it as a philosophy. So there are a lot of critics of religions, but there are very few sophisticated critics of Buddhism. A lot of criticism you hear of Buddhism from new atheists is pretty unsophisticated because they really don't know what they're talking about. I mean, of course, their overall criticism of irrational beliefs stands, but in their specifics, they kind of get pretty cartoonish and they are uninformed. Well, obviously, with this guy who actually spoke Tibetan, this was not the case. His criticism really resonated with me. And you have to see here the roller coaster of bipolar life that just a few weeks before I was reading this book, I thought I was communicating telepathically with a bodhisattva. And now with very little time having passed, I was doubting the fundamentals of Buddhism. And this was also traumatic for me at the time. I quit that job after less than 2 weeks for 2 reasons. Number one, I couldn't deal with the suffering of the patients we were transporting. And number two is kind of interesting. I was getting to be afraid of driving. Because my power of concentration was failing, driving was no longer a seamless reflex for me. Everything had to be a conscious decision, like you're a student driver. In the snow and everything, I was afraid of driving, which was something incomprehensible to me just a few weeks before that. My powers of concentration, my parts of my brain were just shutting down. You know when you see like a large building with its power being shut off and in the whole different segments of light are just shutting off one by one? This was what was going on with me. And I just couldn't do this job for a variety of reasons. And I had to quit. And in fact, I didn't want to do anything. I didn't believe in anything. I didn't have faith of any kind whatsoever, religious or otherwise. I was just done. I was done. In the beginning of 2015, we went to celebrate my grandmother's birthday with my mother. And we were sitting there around the table, and I had to inform her that I left my job. My mother was very upset by this, and she asked me why. And I said I couldn't deal with the suffering of people. And she said, which people? And my grandmother said, the people he's transporting. And my mother said, it's very strange how you feel so much for other people. And I started crying and ran out of there. And then I just confined myself to my room, and my mother saw that there was something mentally wrong with me, that I had issues. And she found this local government center basically and sent me there. As I was driving there, I was afraid of crashing. My reflexes didn't work. I was just paranoid about dying in a car crash or being mangled. And when I came there, I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't fill out the form, and so this guy, a nice guy who worked there, just led me into a room and started filling out the forms for me because I couldn't focus. And when I came there to the counselor and we started talking before I very quickly got transferred to a psychiatrist, it became pretty evident that I was bipolar. Reflecting back on it, I wonder what was different about this time I encountered the mental health system versus other times. Well, on the one hand, now I had a long history of problems, but the other factor was that I no longer censored myself when talking about delusions. I no longer automatically hid them from my psychologists and psychiatrists. And the reason for that is simple. The spark was gone. I lost the lottery. I lost the lottery, and the spark of life, the manic spark, was gone. Even when I thought one delusion was ridiculous, I still believed in the machinery of delusions. I still believed in the momentum. And I believed in this momentum even when I was depressed. That flame continued. But this flame went out completely. And I just didn't care. I could tell them everything and anything. It was no longer connected with my future. I had no future. I had no future. And paradoxically, it made me more sober. It made me open up about Agvan Dorjiev and all of this stuff. None of this they gave a shit about. They didn't care about any of my stories or my experiences. They just cared about being open about your symptoms of delusions, about your psychotic symptoms. And now I just gave them on the platter. And you know, my friends, maybe Tara did pull that ultimate prank on me. She burst my bubble of delusions and allowed me to connect with reality. You see, do you like that? Do you like that three-dimensional chess? Everything is interdependent. The delusion validates reality, which validates the delusion. How about that? My friends, welcome to the Great Depression. As I've said before in this 6-hour-long video that at this point nobody is watching, the description of depressions tend to be littered with cliches. Even though there is this idea that depression is associated with profound thoughts, it actually is pretty numbing if you have it at the full degree. And so what you hear again and again are these kind of dry things like it's emptiness, you feel hollow. All of those are exactly true, but let me make a few feeble contributions to this field of describing depression, this sorry field. So the number one I would say is the sense that within you have dead meat. Okay, have you heard this one before? I mean, you probably heard the ones I've mentioned like hollowness. Well, this is a different one. Instead of being empty, you're full, but you're full of death. Okay, how's this for a description of depression? So there is a sense that it's like when you're lying down, it's more evenly distributed, and when you sleep, you forget about this dead meat. But when you wake up, a lot of your energy is diverted toward maintaining it, preventing it from completely rotting. And you just kind of wander around like a partial zombie with it. It weighs you down and prevents you from really embracing life in any way. It's just a heavy feeling like you have dead meat inside of you. What an awesome metaphor. What a fucking awesome metaphor. I wish there was a fucking grant for this shit that I could win with that description. And the second one is this. Do you wake up in the morning sometimes and feel a certain tiredness, a certain kind of sense of exhaustion, but it's deeper than just physical tiredness? It's like you don't want to engage with the world. There's nothing you want to do in the world. So it's not just about fucking feeling sleepy. Alright, you fucking idiot. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this ignition, the spark of ignition that doesn't start in you right away. And you have this, a moment of hollowness or something, a moment of disengagement, where all you want to do is go back to bed. But not just because you're tired, but also because there is something in your brain that hasn't turned on. Some sense of momentum, some sense of leaping into life. Thoughts about what you want to do, what you aspire to do, don't start humming in the background. Nothing is humming. You just want to go back to bed. So this existential sleepiness, you could call it, or this little paralysis, this tiny paralysis that then goes away, lasts throughout your day if you have clinical depression. You don't want to engage with the world, and it's not even that you don't want to, you forgot how to. Nothing starts stirring within you. The magnet is dead. Nothing sticks to it. That's kind of it. You know, like when you have a dead battery in your car and you start the ignition and some lights turn on and then they shut off, they flicker off. Well, that's the emotion I'm aiming for. There is no go, there is no momentum, there is no spark. And this brings me to my depression philosophy, and that's the worldview I would adopt when I would be paralyzed by depression. And this worldview would be focused on cohesion. Who's happy in this world? A lot of people who are happy are religious people in a tight community, or just people in a tight community. This cohesion, this feast of the social animal, reinforces their sense of meaning. And I'm not talking about conceptual meaning as in a set of ideas, but a sense of meaning. When somebody hugs you and you actually care about that person, and it's not one of these fake, trivial, hollow hugs you get at the office, but when you really feel connected with a human being. It's not like there is a formula of meaning that appears in your mind. Rather, there is a sense of meaning. And that's what most people live with. Most people don't have a written out idea about a meaning of life. And the best word to describe this, even though it might not be perfect, is cohesion. And so when I looked around other people, functioning people, when I was profoundly depressed, I didn't know how they did it. I would look around and see people mowing their grass, playing with their dog, playing around with their children, going to the store, watching stupid shows on television. I didn't know how they were able to function. The world was filled with brutality, filled with randomness. The history of the 20th century is one where 200 million human beings have been killed by others. And here are these people who lived in oblivion of that. They lived in their own insular bubble, and that bubble wouldn't form around me. Nothing made sense. The waves of slaughter and killing washed over me. It's just like Leonard Cohen saying, you know, it's either crucifixion or the Holocaust. Well, I kind of lived there. In an abstract sense, of course. I never in my life experienced anything like that literally. But the one thing you don't feel between the crucifixion and the Holocaust is any sense of cohesion whatsoever. You're just kind of drifting, and you don't understand how people can actually stay afloat and swim, where they get the energy to swim. You both consider them deluded, and you envy them for their ability to function in life when you can't. Of course, this philosophy, much like my manic thoughts, is just the text I composed to the music. It's not something rational, like this fucking alarm. Where are these fucking alarms coming from? I thought it only fucking beeped at midnight, but now it's 3 in the morning. I can't get away from this fucking alarm. I don't know where it is in my house. Anyway, my friends, that's depression. I don't know what else to say. The most amazing thing about this depression is that I just don't remember the year 2015. I really can't get over that fact. Of course, I have scattered memories here or there. I made like one post on Facebook with a cat because the cat was pulling on the string off of my coat, and it was on the one hand a funny shot. On the other hand, the cat had such determination and such lust for life when it did it that it came at stark contrast to what I was feeling. It's almost like a cat had an intrinsic sense of cohesion and meaning that I obviously lacked. So I took a picture of the cat and posted it on Facebook. For some reason, my mother wouldn't buy me pop, Pepsi, or vaping supplies during this time frame, thus depriving me of the little glimmers of joy. Yet nevertheless, periodically she would force me to go on different missions to buy a little shit so I would get out of the house. And sometimes I could accumulate money with the change I had saved, and I would buy this cheap vaping juice, disgusting juice with apple flavor that I still remember because it would borderline make me vomit. I would get the cheapest supplies for it, and then I would sit around and puff on that thing. And if I also had a bottle of Pepsi, this was the highest aspiration I had at that time, being 29 years old. But mostly what I remember is going to the psychiatrist. The process has started at this point where we were trying different medications. Now, there are certain psychiatrists who really believe in lithium, and then there are people who don't believe in lithium, psychiatrists who don't. And she was in that category who didn't really believe in it. I mean, lithium can over time, like we discussed earlier, undermine your kidneys. However, it is detectable. And lithium continuously requires blood exams. You have to constantly, throughout the year, have your blood taken and tested. And maybe for these reasons, some psychiatrists are reluctant to prescribe it, and she certainly was one of them. So she instead wanted me to go on the latest antipsychotics. Now, at the time, I defined psychosis in my head as having hallucinations and hearing voices, and therefore I didn't think of myself as psychotic, because naturally believing yourself to be a reincarnated llama and the future president of Russia doesn't really qualify you as psychotic in my mind. And so I would tell my mother, oh, she's just giving me these antipsychotics because they're going to work on mania. Whereas in the mind of the psychiatrist, I was a religious psychotic who needed an antipsychotic. At one point, she literally told me to look around on the internet and see which drugs make sense for me. And of course, I was doing my own research, I read the Bipolar guidebook, and I was pushing for lithium. And finally, she conceded after I had a very negative experience with one of these antipsychotics where I started pacing around in a sense of horror, in a sense of existential horror, and started slashing my leg with a knife. At this point, finally fucking lithium won out and she was open to it. I was a big lithium fan, and when I told my mother, she said, oh, Ivan, you're finally gonna get your poison. And I did get my poison. I did get my lithium. It might strike you as very odd that I essentially prescribed myself a medication, even though I didn't set the dose, but part of this has to do with the fact that there is a big compliancy issue. A lot of people with bipolar disorder abandon their medications. So you really have to have a marriage. You really have to establish that legitimacy between the patient and his medication. So I don't know if this lobbying for a medication happens with other psychiatrists, but it happened here, and I got what I wanted, and I'm taking it to this day. Now, one of the things that lithium is famous for is quashing suicidal thought, suicidal ideation, a very indifferent and cold description in psychiatry of this existential dilemma of whether you kill yourself. It's always kind of funny to me that there's just this symptom, suicidal ideation, and it can be treated. And lithium actually quashes that existential dilemma to a degree. I mean, I still have suicidal thoughts to this day, but at the time when I was depressed, it really moved away a lot of my thoughts away from suicide and into the realm of consistent fixation with death in general. Back in the day when I was depressed, one of the few things I remember doing is looking at Wikipedia category for suicides, and I would just click on random names and read their stories. These were my heroes at the time. These were the people who had the guts, who had the willpower to leap to the other side. This was my tribe, the tribe of people who didn't find cohesion with this universe. And whether they lived in the 17th century or the 19th century or the 20th century, we had that bond I felt at the time. And I read them like the way an old communist would read the biographies of Bolsheviks or something. I really admired them, and it gave me pleasure and satisfaction to the extent that I could experience it, that there were people who could do this. There are people who really fulfilled my dream at the time that I didn't at the time even have the energy or the concentration of will to fulfill. And once I got on lithium, this relaxed pretty quickly. The other medication I got prescribed at the time is lamotrigine, brand name Lamictal. It is an anticonvulsant, and it helps people with bipolar disorder. It prevents them from beginning the cycle, especially the depressive cycle. It's one of the few medications that can prevent the depressive cycle or reduce its severity. Lamotrigine can be very dangerous because if there are sudden increases or decreases in dose, it could create a lethal skin rash. And the funny thing that when I was prescribed that, I was kind of praying for it. Well, there was a part of me that really wanted to get that skin rash and fucking die already. But even though lamotrigine can reduce or prevent a new depressive cycle from starting in bipolar, it is generally not believed to be able to halt an existing one, and neither is lithium. And that's one of the big issues in treating bipolar disorder, because it is possible to treat mania. It's not a perfect process, but it is much more of a straightforward process than treating bipolar depression, because people with depression get prescribed antidepressants. And we saw what kind of effect it had on me.
But the real place to find yourself is inside yourself, and if you look deeply enough, then you'll know there's nothing there, just a continuum of energy that can go spastic, or it can just flow in a relaxed manner.
And so even though this depression went on for a year, both of us, myself and the psychiatrist, were reluctant to give me an antidepressant. Sometimes antidepressants are prescribed to people with bipolar because it's believed that they are augmented by the mood stabilizers, but it is still a risky proposition, and so we just decided to wait it out. And that wait finally ended in April of 2016, 5 to 6 months since I have turned 30 years old. My mother sent me on an errand to pick up medications for my grandmother from the Good Samaritan Hospital around downtown Cincinnati, close to the University of Cincinnati campus. As I was waiting for these drugs to be prepared, I decided to go for a little walk. I left the hospital and I went to Ludlow Avenue. It is a small kind of hipster bohemian street. And I was walking around there, looking at the Indian restaurants, looking at the little cafes and little stores selling trinkets from Nepal. And it is at that point when I was walking in that street that for the first time in more than a year, I felt that ignition start. I actually felt a proactive enjoyment of life. I felt a connection with existence. I felt different dreams and desires form in me that were basically dormant for all this time. Maybe once in a while there was a tiny flash, but nothing like this. I distinctly remember that moment like just some moment of enlightenment. I distinctly remember walking around that street and feeling that sensation that I haven't felt in a very, very long time. So feel free to shed a salty tear for me at this point because my Great Depression was over. So here we are, the year 2018, the final chapter of this video, the final chapter of the strange odyssey. Where are we today? I will summarize my present day condition and I'll try to make it quick, because it's one thing to describe your aches and pains in the past tense where they have a sense of a third person narrative, as opposed to describing them today when they have a possibility of sounding like first person whining. Even though I don't completely think that they are, that's the way it always sounds when people describe their psychological states. Let's start with a positive. I'm sure you've heard a lot of horror stories, they're numerous, of people receiving Fuck! What the fuck is going on? Let's start with a positive. I'm sure you've heard numerous stories of people on psychoactive medications having horrible side effects, horrible life-killing, life-defeating side effects. I want to report that for myself, on a day-to-day basis, I have no side effects whatsoever. I notice no side effects whatsoever. Maybe I have a little bit more of a dry mouth, but it's hardly barely registers as a problem, and in fact I probably wouldn't have noticed it if I didn't think about it. Over the long term, I did have some issues with nausea. Over the period of 2 years or so that I've been taking these medications, I did have 2 instances where I threw up in the morning while I was going to work, probably because I haven't eaten the day before and taken Lamictal. It's possible that I have issues with drinking alcohol, because I don't have a social life, and because I don't like alcohol on my own. I hardly ever drink it, but one day I did drink it with a friend, and I just had like 2 or 3 beers, and later I had profound nausea and was throwing up. So that was distressing, because I would like to be a social drinker in the future, in the phantom future, where I have a social life. Lamotrigine can interfere with that. Aside from that, nada, nothing. No skin rashes, no acne that people attribute to lithium, no feeling like a zombie. I think a lot of people with bipolar disorder who report feeling like a zombie after taking lithium, chances are they're just so adjusted, so used to these crazy rhythms that any step toward normalcy feels pretty zombifying. In the years since I've been diagnosed and have been taking these medications, I haven't had a clinical depressions, and I haven't had my normal day-to-day depressions that consumed most of my life in my 20s. These are completely gone. I haven't had a manic episode, a serious manic episode, and the biggest thing I had was this preoccupation with the Buddha's dominion. But that lasted for around 2 weeks, and I wasn't fully committed to it. Even though it was drawing me in, even though it was very seductive to be the head of the dominion and have the Dominion Unified Forces salute you as they departed to help the people in Puerto Rico or whatever, to help them out with a hurricane. As seductive as this world was, I didn't completely sing along to it. I didn't completely submit to it. I've been able to hold a job since the middle of 2016 without taking many days off, hardly any, without having any vacation, which unfortunately in the context of my life, being able to hold a job for 2 years qualifies as an achievement. I was able to pursue this creative project, this very YouTube channel you're watching right now, the one person who actually got to this point in the video. And these are the types of creative projects that I wasn't able to pursue before I was medicated. I would have fell into depression and wouldn't be able to really make or upload videos, or I would have been manic, where I would be swarmed with creative thoughts, with grandiosity, and I wouldn't need the outside world in order to validate myself. I would just exist in this swirl without needing to actually create videos. All the images, all the flashes, all the momentum would be around me, would be within my head. And that's something I would have to actually chisel in the outside world. I wouldn't have to chisel my horrible videos that get very few views. I could just imagine them in my head. Overall, being diagnosed and medicated have made me sober in the way that I've never been in my adult life. But as any recovering drug addict knows, sobriety doesn't mean happiness. And it really doesn't mean happiness in my case. I'm sorry to inform you. I know you've watched all this shit and for a happy ending, but alas, unfortunately, it just put a cap on my misery. It didn't really make me into a normal human being with a normal ability to enjoy life. Which brings me to the issues of my bipolar life, my self-conscious, self-realized life, the answer that I have been looking for throughout my 20s, the answer of knowing who I really am, looking in the mirror every day and knowing that a mentally ill person is looking back at you. What are the issues? Well, the first one is a fear of clinical depression. I had 2 of them, and they both lasted for months. They both lasted for a time frame that would destroy and disable any life unless you had some fantastic employer who would be paying you for being depressed. An employer that hardly exists, and especially doesn't exist at my skill level. So where am I supposed to go when I leave my mother's house? I fucking hate living in Ohio. Nothing against Ohio and nothing against Ohioans, but every single moment that I lived here, I've hated it, except for Columbus, but especially here in Cincinnati where I am. My dream is to go back to the West Coast, go back to that beautiful Pacific Ocean. That's where I belong, that's where I want to go. But I'm incapable of going there in any future, because what if I collapse into a depression? And then once again I have to pack all my shit into storage and then fly out like a zombie back to my mother's house. Unfortunately, my mother's house is the center of my depressing universe, because there are no guarantees. These drugs reduce the possibility of my developing a depression, but by no means can they ever prevent it. And the only silver lining here is I always had my most severe depressions after periods of mania. And these drugs should prevent mania, especially lithium, or at least tamp it down. And so hopefully, if I don't have these manias, intense manias, I'm not going to have an intense depression. But there are just no guarantees. I live in perpetual fear and awareness of it, and unfortunately it links me to the stagnation in my mother's house. The second one is psychological weakness. A lot of these issues have to do with the fact that I'm weak. My psychological system is weak. My immune system for dealing with stress is very weak. Anthony Bourdain described a situation where if he got a bad burger at the airport, he could be depressed for days. Sounds ridiculous, and as exhibitionist as I have been in this video, I will not reveal, because it's too embarrassing to reveal, the kinds of trivial life events that invoke in me a sincere desire to die. One that I might not act upon, but one where if I was presented with an abstract button to just terminate me immediately with an impulse, I could potentially press it, or at least I would definitely lust for it with everything I have. Am I really ready for adult life? Am I ready to have children ever in my life? Now, I don't want to have children, and that's the last thing I ever want to have at this point. However, I live with the realization that even if I wanted to, chances are I wouldn't be able to have it. Wherever I would live, with whoever I would live, there would need to be some sort of a cocoon of protection of me from stress, because under intense pressure, under intense stress, I'm just not going to react like a normal, psychologically healthy human being. Doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be rowdy and stab anybody in the eye or whatever, but I just could fucking be paralyzed, be stuck in some sort of a psychological fetal position and be unable to act. This hasn't happened to me, but I dread it. I dread that possibility. Another issue is my inability to concentrate. Throughout my day, there are different racing thoughts going through my head. They could be depressive thoughts, they could be inspirational thoughts. They don't exist at the same level as they did when I wasn't medicated, but they're still there. And though I've been able to keep a job for 2 years, the only reason I was able to work these jobs during these 2 years is because they involve driving. Now, driving is a fucking reflex for me, and as I drive, I can contemplate all these things, I can process all these thoughts as I drive. Can I work in an office? Hasn't been tested yet since I've been medicated. It seems like a goofy problem and it sounds like bullshit. And a lot of my life today is trying to figure out where bipolar ends and where something that I can impact begins. Where is this parasite and where is free will? Where are my natural flaws that I could actually modify? But I'm not sure that I can modify this one. I really am not sure. I mean, I'll have to do it. I'll have to fucking try it, because most people have jobs that they don't enjoy, that don't perfectly synchronize with their racing thoughts. But most people also don't have these racing thoughts to the extent that I do, I don't think. And the final topic here is, of course, the most important one, and it's the ladies, women. You can't live with them, can't live without them. Although I have succeeded so far. Now, at what point, at which date, do you tell a lady that you have a mental illness? I'm not sure. You see, I haven't really gone on so many dates. Sometimes I start talking with a lady and I tell her that I am bipolar, and a couple of times they just organically fade away, disappear into those woods. I'm like, whoa, there's a little pony galloping away from me on the rainbow of mental health, going to the other side. Goodbye. Now, I don't hold it against anybody, ladies or gentlemen, for not wanting to date people with mental illnesses. If you tell a dude that a girl is bipolar, his next question is going to be, how hot is she? You tell a lady that a guy is bipolar and she's going to express some pity, but not of the mating kind. It's just not really a good calling card, bipolar disorder. It sounds like filled with drama and insanity. And in fact, unfortunately, it can be. There are people with bipolar disorder who don't just hurt their relatives inadvertently through their own suffering, but who actually manifest themselves, their symptoms, or maybe they're just assholes, in inflicting suffering on others. That does happen. There are bipolar people who are abusive and who are abusive to their children as well. It does happen. One time I saw a comment underneath a video about bipolar disorder when one former spouse said, underneath the bipolar disorder, there's still a narcissistic personality, but we wouldn't find it on this channel. We wouldn't find it on this channel. No 6-hour-long videos about anybody's life here. No need for a big pity party here. I myself have very superficial standards. I don't have to be single. If I lowered those standards, I could have a girl right now. There could be a girl right now ready to pity me like I want to be pitied. Unfortunately, she wouldn't have the other attributes that I demand. Wouldn't have the other attributes that I want to reach. My friends, I want to reach for that top shelf, but that top shelf is not for Crazy Ivan. I have to contend with the lower shelf, but I don't want to. And so I just fucking sit here in my own misery. It's not a problem. It's not a big deal. Would I date a girl with bipolar disorder? Depends on how hot she is, okay? Give me a fucking rating. Bipolar 1, bipolar 2, fucking cyclomania. It doesn't fucking matter. It doesn't matter, baby. You go off your medications, just don't indulge with that fucking fatty foods, baby. Come on. Oh, come on. You see, but all of this contemplation doesn't make it any easier, because check this out. I tell a girl, what do you do for a living? Oh, I drive a cargo van. I drive a cargo van with a college education. Where do you live? I live with my mom. And then I could drop the bipolar on her. You see, it's gonna have an explanatory power. It's gonna explain everything. And now I've updated myself, upgraded myself from a loser to a mentally ill loser. Fucking fantastic. Well, anyway, well, let's move on. There's nothing else I could say on this topic. Sobriety doesn't equal happiness. And medication means that I have a half-dead octopus in my head. He wants to spread his tentacles. He wants to do the old dance with me as a puppet, but unfortunately it doesn't work out. But he's not the only one missing out. I'm missing out as well. Over my bipolar years, my sense of meaning, my upward stimulation level has risen rather high, and there's nothing in day-to-day life that can truly compare to that. Nothing in day-to-day life can compare with the highs I have enjoyed before, with the highs of meaning, with the highs of engagement with life, even if that engagement was born out of a crazy swirl of delusions. It doesn't negate the overall experience. And so as I look toward the future, the machinery that's been built in me, the machinery that has been flexing its muscles for a decade, it can only generate grandiose dreams. I'm still a dreamer. I'm still a crazy dreamer. I just don't believe in them. I don't believe in them coming true. A part of me really has died in 2014. Maybe it will come alive sometimes later. But there is a kind of a hollowness I feel now. Not the hollowness of depression, but a hollowness of something else. I don't feel like the other people. I can't enjoy the things other people enjoy. I don't exist on the cycle. I'm not like the rest, man. I should be on Tumblr. I'm so special. So what future should I aspire to? A condo in Portland, an attractive hipster girlfriend with whom I can debate the limits of third wave feminism, a cat adopted from a no-kill shelter, Whole Foods bags around the house, a job coding for a non-profit is just not for me. What is for me, it's too ridiculous for me to say. What I can say is that much of life right now, I just don't enjoy it. Much of the time, I don't enjoy being alive. I'm sorry to tell you that. And the older you get, the more concrete the idea of suicide becomes. Because when you're young, the spaces are infinite. And then bipolar comes, mania comes, and they're even more infinite, if that's possible, if that makes any sense whatsoever. And you're used to that infinity. You have glanced at that infinity. And even when I was depressed, maybe not in my first clinical depression where you become zombie, but in my normal depressive days that have consumed me, I have always had that spark. I've always wanted to go back to that momentum, to that high, to that infinity. That spark kind of defined me. I was looking for it. It was like a worm looking for my hook. And I just wanted to rise with it up there to the heavens somewhere, but I got nowhere, of course. I just got a diagnosis. And without that infinity, without that illusion of infinity, I'm just a loser in my mother's house with a background behind me romanticizing his mental illness in the past. But listen, let's not get down. This thing is over. And I'm happy that you've watched it. I want to thank everybody who has helped me out throughout my years, people who have helped me move, my mother, who we hardly interact with. I want to thank everybody, and I really have almost nothing else to say. It's been very difficult making this thing. It has awoken a lot of things in me, awoken a lot of memories. I didn't even relate to this idea that going back into memories could be traumatic. I thought it was some sort of an exaggeration. I wanted to build the narrative of my life around bipolar disorder, and in my head I was thinking, well, you're kind of overdoing it. It's not going to play as big of a role as you will present it as playing in the video. But as I have been going through my memories, in fact, I've realized no, it really has defined my life, and it's not an exaggeration, and it's as strange to think about now as it was when I did journey to this government clinic, when I did get the official name for what I had, and when I did see its symptoms take the place of and give labels to these states of mind that were so important to me. But don't really listen to my down attitude right here with my depressive attitude. It is the end of the year, and the one thing we know is that you can check in with me later at the beginning of 2019 and see how I'm doing then. Because, you know, moods, they change.